Good evening all, and welcome to the best night of the year. Happy Halloween to you all. I hope you have a very spooky night indeed. If it is spooks you're after, then you have certainly come to the right place. For tonight, we have 100 tales of ghosts and paranormal, which I'm sure many of you will find creepy. So for now, it's time to get comfortable. It's gonna be a long ride, so let the darkness take control. My family owns a country house in rural Missouri that I grew up visiting pretty often. There were plenty of beds and rooms to sleep in, but I always stayed in a room in the basement, since it stayed nice and dark well into the day, and the bed in that one was by far the comfiest. Ever since I can remember, I always had a weird feeling when I went down there, but I was usually so tired from running around and doing farm work all day that I had no trouble falling asleep. So, it never really bothered me. Stuff started to really pick up around the time I was 12 or 13. The one thing that really sticks out was one night when I was drifting off to sleep. I kept seeing a human-sized shadow walk past my room. This room was at the end of a hallway, and I saw it slowly walk back and forth past my room about 3 times, almost like it was someone on patrol or something. I always kept the door slightly ajar, and the bright hallway light on, because of the creepy vibes. Finally, I saw whoever it was stop in front of my door and wait there for 3 minutes before moving on. The part that really freaked me out and confused me was that the hallway boards are normally super creaky. Like even my little 12-year-old body would make these things pop and crack like crazy. So I knew whoever was walking in the hallway at night couldn't have actually had any weight on them. The other thing that happened that really freaked me out actually caused me to stop sleeping in that room again. I was laying in bed, but this time I had just woken up and was laying with my feet hanging off the end of the bed, when clear as day, I feel a single finger trace a line from the heel of my foot to the tip of my big toe. I even felt the damn fingernail at the tip of the finger. That same day, I went to my grandma and told her everything, and that I didn't want to stay in that room, and could she please make a bed up for me in an upstairs room. It was then that she told me the family secret. My great-grandpa built that house in the early 50s, but in order to do it, they dug up the grave of a Confederate soldier and moved his grave to a new spot 50 yards away. They had a priest bless the new spot and everything, but apparently that wasn't enough for the soldier. The adults in the family kept this from us kids so that we wouldn't get freaked out staying there. There was another time that I had been running around and came inside real quick to use the restroom. I ran through the living room and saw an old man wearing overalls facing a giant bookshelf and looking at all of our family photos. As I ran through the living room towards the bathroom, he just slightly turned his head and smiled at me. My grandpa was also somewhere around the house, so I just assumed it was one of his friends or people working for him and thought nothing of it. I never saw him again after that, but a few years later I was flipping through old family pictures and recognized one of the people. It was the same man I had seen that day wearing the exact same outfit. Jean overalls and a plain white t-shirt, with the same sweet smile on his face. I asked my grandma who that was. Turns out it was my great-grandpa, the man who had built the house, and who died 20 years before I was born. Even though I never saw him after that, I would always come back to the living room to see his favorite old rocking chair rocking back and forth. It never freaked me out because I knew who it was, and that he was probably just saying hi and enjoying his old favorite spot in the afterlife. Also, by the time I had told my grandma about all the weird experiences I'd had, and she explained to her that several of the women in my family have a knack for seeing ghosts and stuff, It made me feel better, because I literally see something or have very freaky dreams every time I visit. Things I've also heard and seen include a random little girl watching me while I was sleeping, a young Native American man watching me and saying something I couldn't understand, random objects moving to different places when no one was there, a baby crying when there was no baby around, and just general nuisances from that Confederate soldier in the basement. I think he enjoyed trying to scare me, so I really didn't like him. I was working in London for 2 weeks, staying in a flat owned by a friend of a friend while he was out of town. About halfway through the job, I got food poisoning and was pretty sick for 3 days. I still had to work. I got home one night about 12 and was chilling in the front room reading a book before going to bed, when I felt someone else was in the room. I looked up and there was a Native American dude stood in the middle of the room. He was wearing some kind of vest or waistcoat, and I see dark lines running up his forearm. He raises a hand, says some stuff directly to me, and just vanishes. I wasn't scared, just a bit strange, and I went to bed. A few hours later I woke up and wasn't sick anymore, and I drew a portrait of him in my sketchbook. A few days later I was back home, sat on some stairs waiting for my girlfriend with the name Little Crow popped up into my head, and I wrote it next to my drawing. About 6 months later, I hadn't mentioned this experience to many people. The original friend whose flat I stayed in gave me a book of Native American history, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and there was a chapter about a Dakota chief called Little Crow. The photo of him looks like my drawing. He always wore long sleeves because he was shot by his brother when he was younger, and the bullet passed through both his arms. The wounds became infected and left ugly scars that he was embarrassed about. This happened to my cousin. This was years ago, but we have a family home in the province of the Philippines, and we refer to it as the White House because there are supposed to be ghosts there. In Filipino culture, ghosts are all white. If they're another color, they're demons. I don't completely remember why we were there, but I remember it was time to eat dinner. So our uncle told my cousin to wake up his mum who was sleeping downstairs. My cousin, Jared, didn't want to go up there because he knew that's where the ghosts were. So my uncle said, "It's up to you, your mum won't be able to eat then." So Jared got really worried that his mother wouldn't be able to eat dinner. So he went up the rickety old staircase and entered the first 3 rooms. He saw his mum sleeping under the blanket, so he went to shake her awake. Before he could put his hands on the blanket, he heard a voice call out, "Jared?" He quickly turned and saw his mum standing in the doorway. When he looked back at the bed, the blanket was laying completely flat. I had a long-time employee we called MacGyver because he had such a knack for fixing or improving anything with whatever he had on hand. An example is a storage cabinet that had the handle broken years ago. Instead of fixing the lock, he strategically placed a magnet that holds it closed, and it's still there today. He died of cancer in 2010, and just a few days after he passed, I accidentally broke a shelf off the wall. I tried rehanging it with no luck. It had broken, and the screws that anchored it were missing. I threw the shelf in the garbage, but not before saying I wish Chris was still here, because he would have figured it out. I have the only keys to the office. I'm the first in and last out. The next morning when I came in, the shelf was out of the trash and rehung. Push pins were used to both hang it and stabilize it. Exactly the type of fix that he would have done. To this day, I have no explanation for how that happened. Chris is a Christian, raised through and through. He's not one of those forceful Bible bashers, but get him on the topic of religion and he'll talk your ear off for hours on end. He believes that the judgment day is coming soon, in his lifetime, as most Christians do, and how anything that goes against the Christian faith is demonic and therefore evil. He is also a believer in a lot of conspiracy theories, from how the UN is a front from sending money to terrorists in the Middle East, to how global warming is caused by Russian submarines detonating bombs under the Arctic ice, to aliens and alien abduction. Alternatively, I'm an atheist and don't go for any of that nonsense. No matter how many ancient alien documentaries or Bible passages he quotes as proof of his claims to the truth, although I am a firm believer in ghosts because I've seen them ever since I was a child. Despite our differences in beliefs, we've been good friends for almost 20 years, due to the fact that we respect each other's views and never let our discussions on religion and the paranormal get out of hand to the point of raining blows down on each other. The night that this happened played out just like any other night. He had dinner, spent some time playing music in his stack of vintage cassettes, and scolding one of his cats, Bingo, for knocking down some of the World War II model planes that he builds for a hobby. It was around 10:30 p.m, which according to Chris was late, and he decided to call it a night. He was awoken maybe an hour later to hearing scratching sounds at his bedroom door, so thinking it was one of his cats, he goes to open it, expecting one of his furry companions to come sauntering in. There was no one. Thinking nothing much of it, he closed the door and went back to bed, and just as he was throwing the doona back over himself, he heard the scratching again. Getting up again, the scratching stopped as soon as he opened the door. Being a little annoyed, he stepped out into the hallway and flicked on the light, wondering if it were his cats playing in the hallway and that they ran off when they heard the door opening. But the hallway was empty. He checked the bathroom thinking they may be hiding there, but found it empty. He looked in the kitchen and saw nothing there either. Chris, confused but too tired to give it any more thought, went back to bed, but left the bedroom door open a crack so that he wouldn't have to get up again, in order for his cats to just let themselves in. He was falling asleep again, and then he felt the mattress near his feet sag, as though someone was sitting on it. Figuring it was one of his cats, he said goodnight to his little furry sleeping companion before he could drift off to sleep. That's when he felt his hair being stroked and a soft woman's voice whispering, "Pretty boy, pretty boy." My friend opened his eyes and saw the figure of an older woman, mid-70s to early 80s, leaning over him in bed, smiling down over him, her hand moving rhythmically in a slow stroking motion over his hair. He let out a slew of curse words, leapt from the bed, grabbed his pillow and spent the rest of the night sleeping in the tub. Chris called me the next afternoon to confirm our plans over the weekend. I'd first thought when he told me about the events of the previous night, with nervousness in his voice, that he sounded like he wasn't sure if it had really happened or not, or had just had a bad dream and his brain hadn't processed that he was awake. Chris was just starting to describe what the woman looked like to me over the phone, when I stopped him and suddenly asked, did she look like an older lady with short black hair, kind of slightly old and hunched over? He was genuinely surprised, exclaiming in an almost unbelievable voice, "Yes, how did you know that? I've seen her at your house numerous times now, but I've never said anything to you because I didn't want to scare you." There was a long silence on his end of the line, like he was trying to process what I just revealed to him. Chris's voice finally came back, shaking, and asked me, "Are you serious?" It was now that I wanted to say that it was just a joke, because I know how nervous Chris can get when it comes to talk of ghosts and anything that doesn't conform to his beliefs. But I decided to just be honest with him. I figured it would be easier for him to accept his first ghostly encounter instead of lying to him. I told him yes, that I'd seen her on occasions where I was over at his house, but I told him that she wasn't a bad spirit and that I didn't get any ill vibes from her whenever I saw her or felt she meant harm. Not surprisingly, this didn't make Chris feel any better, and he kept bombarding me with questions like what she was doing there, how long she had been around, and what she wanted. And I told him that she just probably enjoyed being in the house that she used to live in when she was alive, and keep watching over it. I told him that I didn't really feel like she was going to go all poltergeist in the house, and that she was just curious about her new roommate, and not to worry about her. But Chris, being opposed to all things supernatural and believing anything like ghosts go against the Bible, didn't believe me and said he would have a talk with his minister from his local church to see about getting his house blessed. I assured him it wasn't necessary, but I could see his point of view on such a thing. I mean, after not believing in ghosts all his life, only to be confronted by one would be the same as me being an atheist, suddenly having the existence of God proven to me. So Chris and his church minister held a short service at his house, whereby at the end, Chris was told that the old woman had found peace throughout their prayers and was able to move on. I visited Chris's house a week after the blessing, where after some time of hanging out and having him show me his latest model airplane, did he ask me, "Do you know if that old woman's still here?" I shook my head and said nope, can't see her anymore, even though she was standing in the doorway between the hallway and the lounge room. I figure there's no sense making the poor guy worry over something he cannot control. My old neighbours were moving out and paid me £50 a month to keep their old house clean and locked up while they were trying to sell it. One day, a random couple from a few doors down came to my house to tell me that they had seen someone inside the house and wondered if it was me. I grabbed my torch and me and my dad ran over to the house thinking that some squatters had thought they'd hit the jackpot. But when I went in, the place was completely empty. I checked every single room and cupboard inside the house and couldn't find a soul, so I brushed it off and thought it must have been the owner's daughter or something, as she'd left before the couple came to mine. I spoke with the couple a few days later and told me that they were absolutely 100% certain that they saw the bedroom light turn on and saw two children playing in the room. I told them that it must have been the owner's daughter, as she has two children, and they told me that they had spoken with her and she hadn't been to the house all week. I laughed it off, thinking that the couple must have been seeing things, but ever since that day, I've had a very weird feeling come over me every time I walk into the house. It's sold now though, so the ghost kids are no longer my problem. Ever since I returned home from a 4-month trip, my room wasn't the same anymore. When I was there, I usually felt a warm feeling of security and coziness, or at least I didn't feel a feeling of dread or hopelessness. I'm a guy and live with my mom and 2 younger brothers in a town in a very isolated valley in the middle of nowhere, and not even in town but rather a few kilometers from it. And on top of that, my room isn't in the house but outside of it, a shed that we revamped into my room. Well, the thing is that the first night I slept there after I came back, I immediately felt a difference. The air felt heavier, and a soft breeze blew on me all night, and I felt an ominous presence standing in the opposite corner of the room, even though I had my lamp on all night, and there wasn't anything there. Looking at that corner makes me feel dread and unprotected, and I'm in constant alert. I can't even sleep. I spend all night watching YouTube videos on my phone and keep me distracted until the sun comes up, where I finally feel better. But the feeling is there, even then. Even with my girlfriend here for the night, I still can't feel safe. Tonight, I'm gonna sleep in the living room of my house because I can't stand it anymore. I'm tired of feeling insecure while in my own room and not being able to get enough sleep. I think it's progressively getting worse, and I've only been back for 2 weeks. Last night I couldn't sleep at all. I ended up passing out from exhaustion at 7 a.m. and woke up at 11 not wanting to spend any more time there. I want to know how I can fix this and what I can do that will make it stop. I was 7 years old at the time this happened. One day out of the blue, I woke up having this odd feeling, like something bad would happen. I couldn't put my finger on what exactly it was, so I shrugged it off. At the time this happened, I was staying at my beloved grandmother's house. I would get to her house straight from school, do my homework, and when done, watch soap operas with her. She was sweet and caring, so she would always check on me. At night time was no exception because she knew that I had trouble sleeping, so she would sit on my bed and rub my legs. After a couple of days upon arriving from school while having lunch at her house, I received terrible news. My beloved grandma had fallen ill. My aunt informed me that she would be staying at the hospital for some time in order to get better from hepatitis B and meningitis. I would visit her every day for over a month right after school, until one day I wasn't allowed to see her anymore. She had health complications. Doctors feared she wouldn't make it through the night, and they were right. She passed away in her sleep that same night. When that happened, I got an overwhelming sadness, even when no one had even told me yet that she was gone. That is when that odd feeling I had started to make sense. The funeral came around, and I wasn't allowed to go, since it was no place for a child. My parents tried to shelter me from the event, hiding what death meant. They said Nana went on a trip, but I knew the truth. That hurt me in a way, because I didn't get to say goodbye. The day she was buried, I remember all the family arrived at her house to spend some time together. We shared stories, looked at pictures until time came around, and we said our goodbyes and went to bed. So I followed my usual routine and went to sleep. Later, during the middle of the night, my door creaked open. I thought nothing of it, until I saw a dent formed on my bed, like someone was sitting down, and I felt a stroke on my legs. I sat up, too tired to process what was going on, and said with a groggy voice, "Good night, Nana." I waved my hand at her and began falling asleep. After that happened, I felt the mattress rose, as if she had stood up from the bed and closed the door softly. She left behind this peace and calmness. I like to believe that she came to say goodbye. Later that same year, a couple of months after my Nana passed, my mum got pregnant with twins. Everything was great. That was the news and joy that we needed. Everything was wonderful. But one day, same as before my Nana fell ill, I had this dread come over me, a feeling that something was wrong. I told my mum that I felt something was wrong, and she told me to brush it off, as it was most likely nothing. A few days after this, I sort of forgot about the feeling, carried my day on as usual and went home after school. I was alone in the house doing my homework at the dinner table, when out of nowhere I heard the sounds of babies crying from the room my parents were setting up for the twins. I could distinguish 2 different cries. This feeling of dread and sadness washed over me again. I decided that since I was about to be a big sister, I had to see what was going on in my baby sibling's room. Somehow I managed to gather up the courage, stand up and walk towards the door. As I approached the room, the crying started to fade away, when it was really intense before. The moment I placed my hand on the doorknob, the crying stopped. I opened up the door, and the room is empty. That night, my dad came home and told me that my mum was in the hospital, and that she would have to stay there for some time. Also, that's when she came. The babies were not going to be in her tummy anymore. Also, that when she came, the babies were not going to be in her tummy anymore. He made sure I understood they were not coming because they had passed away. I looked at my dad, muttered okay, and went to my room. I laid in bed and cried non-stop until I fell asleep. Yet I woke up in the early dawn to the feeling of a hand on my leg, but I wasn't scared. So I looked over and saw a dent on my bed, the same way it happened a few months ago. I had this undeniable feeling it was my Nana. I knew I could ask this from her. So I said, "Look out for them, Nana, please," waved my hand and fell asleep again. In the morning I awoke, knowing that everything would be all right. Since that time, 14 years ago, I have not felt Nana's presence again, but I still get that dreadful feeling every time something bad will happen. You might think I'm bluffing, but it's true, and I don't like getting that feeling. It causes me to become quite anxious and reserved. Sadly, that odd feeling never fails. One time I knew a friend of mine would lose his mum, and I couldn't stop it. Anyway, I'm positive my Nana is still looking out for me. So Nana, wherever you are, thank you, and I hope we do meet again. I lived with my parents and my 2 Staffordshire Bull Terriers and was enjoying the 6-week summer holiday from school. I got home one day at around 7 p.m, and after a long day out with friends and playing football, I decided to get a snack from the fridge. My dad was at work, Mum was in the living room with my 2 dogs who were asleep on their bed, and all I could hear was the very faint sound of the TV through the 2 walls that separated the kitchen from the living room. Here's a brief description of the kitchen. We had a small space under the stairs that you could access from the kitchen, where we kept shoes, coats, and some other bits and pieces. The fridge was literally 5 steps away, and the space under the stairs would be on your left-hand side when facing the fridge, and is nearly pitch black, as we had no light in there. I opened the fridge and had a quick browse of what was on offer to crave my hunger, when out of nowhere there was a deep, guttural growl from the space under the stairs. This growl lasted for about 5 seconds. I used to think that people exaggerated when they said that they froze in fear, but I literally couldn't move. My eyes opened wide and my hands started to shake, and after about 10 seconds of standing completely still, I slowly turned to look at the space, as I knew that it had come from there. As I turned and looked at the space, there was nothing. All I could see was the darkness, but I had that feeling of something staring at me intently. The gut feeling screaming at me to run away and that I was in serious peril. I was certain that something was going to crawl out of the darkness and drag me into it. The worst part was that I had to walk past the space to get to the kitchen door. I slowly made my way to the door, and the feeling of danger and dread intensified with every step I took. I ran the last few, swung the door open, and bolted into the living room. My mum looked at me, and she saw how white I was and asked why I was shaking. She asked what was wrong, and I told her what happened. I also asked if the dogs had growled or if there was anything on TV that could have made a noise like that. But my mum said she hadn't heard anything from the dogs or TV that could have been perceived as a growl. My mum grabbed a torch and headed to the kitchen. Sure enough, she came back and said there was nothing there, and that it must have been my imagination. But I know what I heard, and I know that my gut feeling was not just my imagination. There was something under those stairs that seriously wanted to hurt or terrify me. I haven't had any other experiences like that since, and I always become nervous if I'm left in the kitchen alone. I'm 22 now, and still refuse to go anywhere near this space under the stairs. I think there is something paranormal in my apartment. I moved in October 31st, 2018, without the knowledge or knowing a previous tenant had died in the apartment. I'm a paramedic, so I can deal with death a little differently than others. So when I found out from my downstairs neighbor, Gina, it didn't bother me. According to my neighbor, the tenant, Katie, was a younger female in her early 30s, who had reluctantly given birth to her first child. Gina said Katie was a nice woman, but had history of drug abuse and had an abusive boyfriend who was also her drug dealer. Shortly after, Katie gave birth to her child, and she was found dead in the apartment from a heroin overdose while holding the baby. I did not ask specific details of where she was found, because that I didn't want to know. I work night shift, so I am usually sleeping during the day, unless it's the days off where I try to turn myself around and be a normal human being to interact with the world at daytime. For the past month and a half, I've been waking up between 3 and 3:30 and can't explain why. Sometimes I will have to use the bathroom, and other times I just wake up and am unable to go back to sleep. About a week ago, something eerie happened. I was asleep in my bed with my dog and cat when I woke up to what sounded like a woman screaming bloody murder in my ear. It didn't jolt me awake or startle me. I was more confused than anything. Afterwards, I was unable to fall back asleep and just stayed awake until the afternoon because I worked that night, and when I looked at the time, I noticed it was 3:13 a.m. I got home after work at around 8 a.m. I laid down and had trouble sleeping because my downstairs neighbor Gina and her husband Robert were pulling up carpet and pounding on the walls with what I can only assume was a hammer for 6 hours, because when I woke up at 2 p.m. they were still at it. I attempted to go to sleep around 10 p.m. that night, but probably fell asleep at midnight. I woke up at 3:12 a.m., annoyed not being able to fall back asleep, but something was off this night. I sleep with my door cracked open, so that the cat can come and go as it pleases, and I've never had an issue with it until this day. I felt as if someone was watching me in the hallway. I then rolled over and scrolled through Facebook for about an hour and a half, and decided to go run a bath. I got out of the bath at 5 a.m. and walked into my bedroom when I heard a sound at the front of the apartment. I can't really describe the sound, but if anything it sounded like a thud. I walked out of my room and into the front of the apartment and saw that the light cover to my kitchen light was hanging. I thought it was odd, but really didn't pay attention to it and put it back. I took my mum to breakfast that morning and decided to tell her what I had experienced. She knows about Katie's passing in the apartment, and she has also experienced paranormal activity personally. My mum kind of shrugged it off and said I have difficulty sleeping due to working nights and that a light cover falling isn't a big deal. Respectfully, I agreed, and after breakfast we went to the grocery store and I returned back to my apartment. And my brother came over to help bring up all the groceries because I live on the second floor and no one likes doing multiple trips to get groceries out the car. While I was finishing, my mum called me and asked where I was. When I told her I was still at my apartment, she asked if I was messing with her. Confused, I said no and asked why. At that point, my mum told me to hurry up and get to her apartment. When I arrived, my mum was in her bedroom looking visibly nervous. She was supposed to have come and inspected her sprinkler that day in her apartment, and so she had her bedroom door shut. She said that while she was laying in bed, someone knocked hardly on her door 3 times, causing the entire door to shake. After opening the door, she noticed no one was there. She said that she checked the entire apartment and no one was in it, and that the front door was still locked. Trying to recreate the sound and shaking of the door, the only possible way was if someone knocked directly on her bedroom door with force. After leaving my mum's apartment, I went back to mine, and once I met the front door, I had an uneasy feeling. I can't explain why, but as soon as I got up to the door, it just felt like a negative energy. I went in, greeted my animals, and decided I was going to take a nap, due to barely getting any sleep the night before. I went into my bedroom, which is in the very back of the apartment, and went to lay down. My dog followed suit and jumped on the bed and came to her spot. She sleeps in the same spot every time we go to bed, which is at the top of the bed right next to me. I noticed when she jumped on the bed, she was slow to get to her spot. What she did, she immediately looked up at the ceiling above my head, prompting me to look and see if there was a bug. There was nothing. My dog proceeded to look at the ceiling and look away for short periods of time. Approximately 20 minutes before, she refused to sleep in her spot and went to the end of the bed to lay down, still looking at the ceiling. I was unnerved, but somehow managed to fall asleep. When I woke up about an hour later, I was drenched in sweat, like you would have to be breaking a fever. I kept my apartment at 68 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer. I have a fan on me and sleep in light clothes. I usually get cold and do not wake up hot, so I thought this was odd. Later that night, I had a friend over and we were sitting on the couch watching movies. Let me explain the layout of the living room. When you walk through the front door, you're immediately met by a wall. If you look to the right, there is a closet, and if you look to the left, the living room is right there. I have a sliding glass back door that leads to the balcony, with the blinds that almost every apartment complex has. I have a large sectional couch, and the only way for it to fit is block that back door. At around 2:30 a.m. while watching a movie, horror of course, we heard 2 knocks directly behind our heads on the back door. We both looked at each other, and I said, "There's no way that a person could be on my balcony." I open the blinds within probably 15 seconds and look out. Obviously no one's there. At this point, I'm getting creeped out. He ended up staying until sunrise at 6:30 a.m. and then left. I didn't plan on going to sleep until it was daylight at this point. I had trouble sleeping during these days because all I could think about is what kind of spirit is in my home. Or is it something worse? I used a Ouija board when I was 14, so I have my own experience from that, and it's not something I want to relive. One of my co-workers is very spiritual and cleanses her house weekly because she buys a lot of antique furniture, so she is the first person I contacted. She told me I needed to go get white sage and that she would send me cleansing prayers, but that I needed to do it soon. I unfortunately worked all weekend, and this was Friday, so I could not go to do it immediately, so I stayed at my parents' house until I could. After work, I went to my apartment and was met with the negative energy again once I reached the door. I had to get my cat and dog because I was not letting them in there alone. It might be silly, but I didn't want to go in there, and I'm not going to leave them there. The next day, I needed to go back and gather some clothes and sleep clothes, so I convinced my brother and his girlfriend to go with me. My brother's skeptical about paranormal things, but his girlfriend, like I am, is a believer. I take it seriously to not provoke or enrage with a spirit, so I had chosen to ignore. Unfortunately, my brother did not get this memo, and as we were walking up to the door, my brother said, "Maybe I'll believe it if it moves the blind or something." I told him not to taunt it, but he didn't listen. I grabbed what I needed and headed back down to the car. When I got to the driver's side door, something was telling me to look up at the balcony. And when I did, the blinds were moving back and forth. I looked over at my brother and his girlfriend and said, "Do you believe me now?" And the look on their faces confirmed that they saw the exact thing I did. I'm gonna smudge the apartment, but I'm curious if anyone knows what type of spirit I might be dealing with. I haven't been hurt by anything, and everything that has happened to me has been subtle and not alarming. I'm moving out next month. I wasn't renewing my lease to begin with, so this has nothing to do with not staying there anymore. This all started happening mostly after Gina and Robert were remodeling their apartment. They recently just got back from a trip, and anyway, they saw me outside and said they would speak to me since they got a home a few weeks ago, and they don't talk to me and are acting strange since then. Gina is avid for being outside watering her garden, but I've noticed her garden is dying, and I don't see her outside anymore. Robert's vehicle hasn't moved from its parking spot since they got back, and he usually leaves every day. Could there be something sinister going on here? I am a very scientifically minded person, but some things have happened throughout my life that I cannot explain. First off, I'm going to call the road I live off Highway X for privacy reasons. I've lived there my entire life, 1998 to present. I like to describe where I live as the middle of nowhere surrounded by other people. Where I live used to be a Revolutionary War township. No battles happened here though. Nobody has died on my subdivision either. In the mid-20th century, the portion of Highway X I lived at used to be a Girl Scout camp, and in the early 90s, before my family moved here, our property was a cow pasture. We did have a teenage girl die in 2006, taking a sharp turn about a quarter of a mile from my house. In 2011, 2 miles away from my house, on one of the gravel roads branching off Highway X, a mother drove into a creek during high water, as there are no protective barriers there, and she and her children drowned. My mother is very religious, and when I ask questions about her experiences, she gets nervous and is reluctant to answer them. I'm going to tell these stories in chronological order. When I was a baby, my mum heard someone saying, "Hi there, hi," in a cooing kind of way over the baby monitor. She said she couldn't tell if the voice was male or female. She went to my dad, who was on the computer, and asked him if he was just in my room. He said no. Now, this could easily be debunked because baby monitors can pick up radio signals, but it was still strange. When I was a bit older, perhaps 2 or 3, my mum said she was sitting on our front porch and saw a man with a wide-brimmed hat and trench coat standing under the outdoor lights at our neighbour's house, just standing there doing nothing. She said she didn't think much of it, just thought, that's not Charlie. Charlie doesn't wear hats like that, and eventually went back inside because it was weirding her out. Fast forward 10 years, and she said her best friend's husband was casually telling a story about how his dad was haunted by a man that fit the exact same description, not knowing anything about my mum's story. The man didn't leave his dad alone until his dad said, "Get out of my house." My mum's best friend freaked out. When she was little, she saw a man exactly like that pass a window at her grandma's house. And then my mum freaked out and told her story. My mum told me this, so I consulted my best friend Google, and apparently it's something a lot of people see. Around the same time she saw the man in the hat, my dad heard someone knock 3 times at our door. It was nighttime, and my dad looked out the window to see no one there. My mum grew up hearing stories from my grandma, a nurse, who always told stories about people at her job hearing 3 knocks on the door, opening it, and then dying soon after. So of course my mum freaks out and tells her not to open the door. When I was about 12, I started getting hypoagonic hallucinations. When I'd close my eyes, I would see vivid, disturbing images, oftentimes of people being hanged or covered in blood. It was terrifying, gory stuff, and I hadn't seen my first horror film until I was 16. So of course it really bothered me, and I wasn't inspired by anything I'd seen on television. It stopped happening once I moved into my dorm. But when I do get this, it's only at my house. When I was 13, we had a light switch in the basement that could dim when you press it. I had a sleepover in the basement with my friends, and we were talking about boys or whatever 13-year-old girls talk about. And suddenly, the light started dimming and brightening repeatedly. We, of course, freaked out, and then it stopped, and never did it again the entire time we had that lighting set up. One night when I was 15, my ex-boyfriend and I were driving down Highway X, and both complained about feeling like something was wrong. This was about 2 miles from my house, and then we saw what looked like a cloaked figure fly over our car. It looked like the Grim Reaper. We both saw it, and we both screamed in unison. I told my dad, and he said that when he feels like something bad is about to happen, he's usually right, and I shouldn't deny that feeling. 2 years later, I walk past the hallway entrance and I hear, "Hi," right in my ear, loud and clear. I shrieked and I sprinted to my mum and asked her if the TV was on in her room, and she said no. She was right. A few months ago, I walked into the living room and saw my mum's recliner was empty, and I remember thinking, wow, my mum must have went to bed already, and she didn't even tell me. The next morning, my mum asked me if she talked to me after she left for bed. I told her no, and that I remember thinking it was odd that she didn't even say goodnight. She said she woke up after falling asleep in the recliner and saying, "I'm going to bed." And she heard a voice behind her that didn't exactly sound like me say, "Oh, you're going to bed?" She also said our next door neighbor had something in her house, but didn't elaborate and didn't give me a time frame or anything. When she told me this, I already asked enough questions about weird stuff going on around Highway X, and she's not comfortable talking about the paranormal too much because she's afraid it'll invite spirits. My grandpa told me this story about his mum. They were both extremely down-to-earth, honest people. So this is the only supernatural story that I fully believe. His mum had a display case full of china and silverware. If you've never seen something like this, imagine a bunch of glass cupboard-style doors made of glass. You couldn't touch any of the contents without opening the door. Also, it's a display case, which means that no one ever opens it, unless they're bored of the display. So she's walking by this in her living room, and as soon as she just passes it, one of her favorite spoons crashes to the floor. My grandma described it much more than a fall. It was as if someone had thrown it to the ground with force. Shivers went down her spine. She quickly jumps around and sees what she expected. A spoon about 10 feet from the display case. She didn't know what else to do, so she opened one of the doors and put the spoon back where it belongs. When she shut the door, she gets a call and answers it to find out her brother had passed away. The craziest part to me is that a year after I heard this story, my close friend told me an almost identical story, save with a fork. I do not and have never believed in anything supernatural, but I fully believe this, and have spent a lot of time thinking about how this is possible. I don't fully believe it yet, but my best explanation for this is that our souls don't die, and that they are always a part of our life somehow. This happened about 7 years ago. I was 16 years old at the time, and was home alone with only my younger sister Nadine, who was 9 at the time. Our only parent was my mum. She worked a full graveyard shift from 10 to 7, and we had easily become accustomed to it, because we would usually be asleep or at school when she was working. Every night was the same. Get home from school, homework, shower, say bye to mum, and sleep. Often me and my sister would stay up late despite my mum's orders, but nothing crazy ever happened. We lived in an upstairs 2-bedroom apartment. At night, me and Nadine would barricade ourselves in our mother's room, lock the door and sleep. We were always too scared to sleep in separate rooms. Our mother had the key to every door in the apartment, and this specific night, me and Nadine were in the living room watching yet another Family Guy episode. It was getting late, close to midnight, and we definitely had school the next day. As we were preparing for bed, someone knocked on the front door of the apartment. Now, this apartment complex had 2 doors, one metal door on the outside, and then the door made of wood which was technically inside. Therefore, one would need to unlock 2 doors before they could get it. I looked at Nadine. Is Mum home early? I put my ear to the door, and then they knocked again. Who is it? I said through the door, and there was no response. I ordered Nadine to call Mum, but there was no answer. I looked through the peephole and couldn't see anything. It was dark, and whoever it was wasn't tall enough to even see a silhouette. Nadine went to unlock the door, but I yelled at her to stop. My mum always told me she would call for an emergency, and she has the keys to the apartment, and she would have no reason to knock. Before I could come up with a plan, whoever was on the other side of the door began pounding on it as they were no longer knocking. It sounded like they were banging with a closed fist. As if on cue, Nadine and I ran into my mother's room and locked the door. She began to cry, and I tried to console her but was too scared. I waited a few moments in hopes that they would go away, or my mum would call and yell at us to open the door. 2 minutes passed, and my mum called us back. She saw that we called her and took a break as soon as she could call us back. I told her about the knocking, and she urged us not to exaggerate. Whoever it was gone now, and we were okay. She blamed it on perhaps a lone drunk or someone looking for trouble, but regardless, to not open the door, and told us to go to bed. I'd been tossing and turning. It had been about an hour since the first knocking, when suddenly it started up again. Nadine and I shot up. The knocking was now at our bedroom door, and there were no lights on in the apartment, which spooked me further. "Who's in our home?" I called my mum, and she answered on the first ring. "They're knocking at the bedroom door." I was in tears, beyond scared. Nadine had hidden in the closet. While my mum was on the phone, they pounded on the door again, and I extended my arm out with the phone in hand so that she could hear. The pounding was so intense, I felt at any moment how they would break the lock on our door and rush in. She called 911 and came home that night. When she reached the front door, both doors were locked. The officers searched the home for any signs of entry, which wasn't likely since we were on the upstairs level. Nothing was ever found. Nadine and I still talk about this stuff sometimes, because if it hadn't have happened to both of us, I don't think either of us would have believed each other. A few years ago, my sister was married to a soldier in the British Army, and he was stationed in Germany. We all visited her, and she knew I was interested in history. So for a day out, we visited Belsenbergen, the former Nazi concentration camp. As we were walking around, my sister was pushing the pram with my nephew in it. He was 1 or 2 years old at the time. The thing about Belsenbergen is that after the way it was burnt to the ground, it's more or less blank fields. As we walked, we passed a tree. When my nephew asked my sister who the kids were behind us, we all turn around, and no one's there. My sister asked, "Which kids?" And he replied, "The ones in pajamas." Yet again, no kids to be seen anywhere. We all knew for a fact that he had no idea what country he was in, yet alone know about the horrible events which had occurred in that camp. Big up, Niam. I worked in a really old movie theater for my first job. It was a small theater with 6 screens and all in a line, so you could see from one end of the building to the other. Eventually, I got promoted to a manager, so I had to start the movies. We had film still, so it was fairly complicated. You had to thread the projector and then watch over them because they mess up easily. We always joked about ghosts and a lot of weird stuff happening around there, like falling over, doors shutting and hearing voices. Well, one day I was there with one employee, slow midweek day, and I walked out of the office up to the projection booth and out of habit looked both ways. You know, the old left-right? To my right there was a woman in a whitish dress with brown hair, about 4 feet away just standing. I only caught a glimpse of her before doing a double take and she was gone. I wasn't the only person to see her. Several other employees claimed they've seen a similar woman around the theater. I never saw her again though. More silly stuff happened, like doors locking behind you, or things that were on tables ending up on the floor. Our projectors were old film projectors, and more than a few times one of us would forget to start a movie on time, only to find it had been already started for us. Another manager claimed that she saw the ghost woman who was called Sarah in the window upstairs when she was leaving for the night. One time we were watching a movie after hours, and we heard a series of what sounded like tin cans fall in succession around the theatre walls. There were some rumors that Sarah was a projectionist at an old theatre elsewhere, who somehow ended up buried in its walls, and pieces of the building were used in the construction of ours. But we never found any evidence to back up this urban legend. About 2 years ago, my friends and I visited Letchworth Village in Rockland County, New York. It was a psychiatric hospital for the mentally and physically disabled, opened in 1911, and was the site of the first polio vaccine trials in the United States. Letchworth was finally shut down in the 90s because of the rampant abuse and mistreatment of the live-in patients. But many of the hospital's abandoned buildings are still standing on campus, and most are decayed enough or already broken into to be easily accessible. The final building we explored was once the main hospital. My friend mentioned that this place was apparently featured on some ghost hunters type show, one of the most haunted places in America, or something like that. And we were pretty excited when we saw that someone had graffitied on the walls, "The ghosts are here." The first room had rusted metal bars suspended by wires hanging from the ceiling. This in itself was not out of the ordinary, but as we entered, a gust of wind shook the bars, which began to swing and clank eerily against each other. Needless to say, it was a nice spooky entrance. Upon entering that tetanus trap, we entered a long hallway with a big staircase leading to the basement and the second floor. Ignoring every single horror film-infused instinct to not go down the flight of foreboding stairs into what could very well be the gates of hell, we climbed down to the basement, which of course was extremely dark, save for a welcoming burst of light streaming in from a broken window near the stairs. With our flashlights on, we made our way slowly through the basement hall, and at about halfway we found the old morgue. One of my photographer friends had set up his tripod and began taking a long exposure of the morgue as the rest of us waited and jokingly tried to convince him to climb inside of it. As this was taking place, I happened to look back down the hall from where we came. I couldn't make out any details of the hallway except for the beam of light at the other end. It looked like there was something partially blocking the beam of light coming in from the broken window. Kind of like a shadow, but more like a silhouette, where a person's upper torso and head would have been illuminated by the light, instead of just darkness. However, the second I noticed it, it moved, and the beam of light was undisturbed once again. Right around that time, my fight or flight instinct kicked in, and my bowels went a little loose at the sound of footsteps that came clearly from behind the doors of the unexplored room ahead of us. I can't remember if I screamed, cried, or a little bit of both, but we left there pretty quickly after that. The layout of my kitchen is very strange. Now, I was laying around on the couch just watching TV, and I hear this strapping sound, and next thing I know, a measuring cup was being thrown from the counter or fridge. I stood up so fast, and a wave of fear came over me and I nearly cried. No one was in the house with me except my dogs, a very old Chihuahua, and she never leaves her dog bed, and the other is a husky that was lying next to me on the couch. The last one is a golden doodle. She barks at everything, and she was behind me, behind the couch. You know how a ball is thrown, right? That's how the measuring cup was thrown. I can't see the fridge from where I was sitting, and frankly, I don't even know where it came from. No windows or doors were open. It didn't just fall, and I swear on my damn life it was thrown. I don't even know what's going on. One time, I was over at my friend's house with a small group of about 3, as I was planning to stay over the weekend, so I packed a lot. It was around 10 p.m. when we decided to order pizza and watch some movies, and all of a sudden the letterbox in his door starts flapping, and we all thought it was the wind and shrugged it off. The pizza came at around 10:30 p.m. and tuck in. Then the letterbox went again. I had enough and checked and opened the door. There was no one there, and worst of all, no wind, which really creeped me and my friends out. We stayed up till 3 a.m., which was a bad mistake, as the letterbox started to flap more and more, and also harder. That's when I said, "Whoever is living in this house with us, flap the letterbox 3 more times." Hoping to not get a response, the letterbox flapped 3 times, and I started to get even more scared. That night, none of us got any sleep. Moral of the story: if you're planning to stay over a mate's house for a bit and something sounds off, check and rule out the possibilities, then you might be sure of it. My dad's house, before it burnt down in late January of this year, was well known in my family for being haunted. We actually had people come over, sometimes called ghost hunters, and inspect the house. From what they found, and from personal experience, there were 2 children on the first floor, a boy and a girl around the ages of 6 to 9. A man and a woman upstairs, assumed to be a husband and wife, and a man downstairs. The 2 children were shy, but they still liked to play. We mostly saw the boy, as he would peek around the corner of the kitchen when my mum was doing dishes, and then hide again when she looked over at him. He liked hide and seek. I would be alone in the house, and find all of the kitchen cabinet doors open very frequently. My mum told me that one time, when my dad had left for work and I had just left for school, that I had left the TV on when I left, and that she heard a laugh coming from the living room. Thinking it was me, she looked into the room and saw nobody. My stepmom also mentioned that the dogs frequently barked at something at the top of the stairs, and that she would often see a woman standing on the top step. I have so many other experiences. It was certainly a scary place. My family and I had just rented this beautiful historical house that was built around the Underground Railroad era. It had small hideouts and doors where slaves would hide in, and as soon as we moved it, we got uncomfortable vibes from it. We'd hear footsteps coming from the upstairs when everyone was downstairs. The TV would turn on and off by itself, and doors would open and close by themselves. We eventually accepted the fact that we had a ghost, and it seemed harmless. So we called her Claudia. Each of my family members had at least seen Claudia once. She was a tall, dark figure who could move fast. Most of the hauntings would come from my bedroom, and it was always cold and had an unpleasant smell. My little brother began sleepwalking and would have terrible nightmares. One night became the final straw for my family and our relationship with Claudia. My sister and I were away at a friend's house, while my parents and brother were at home. The whole house was asleep when my dad woke up from screaming coming from my bedroom. When he ran out past the living room where my little brother liked to sleep because of his sleepwalking, he noticed that my brother wasn't there. So he ran upstairs where he met my older brother, who had heard the screaming as well, and they saw that my bedroom door was shut and that my little brother was screaming in the room. They both went to open the door, but it was like something was blocking it. And when my dad could finally bust through the door, a black shadow ran right past him and my brother. He entered the room, and it was freezing. He could even see his own breath. He looked over at my little brother, who was laying on my bed covered in sweat and tears, and started yelling his name to wake him up. But my little brother pointed, still asleep, at the corner of the room and started yelling, "Get her, Daddy, get her." My dad looked over but saw nothing but pitch black. That was enough for him. He quickly grabbed my brother, who was stiff as a board, and ran the hell out of there. When my brother woke up the next day, he had no recollection of what happened that night, and still doesn't remember when he talked about it almost 5 years later. We moved out of that house a few weeks after the incident, and my brother stopped sleepwalking as soon as we did. We've heard other stories from the people who currently own the house, but nothing quite as terrifying as what happened to my brother or dad. The house has a great history behind it, but it was just too creepy for my family. When I was 15, my family went for a trip to a hill station named Shimla in India. We booked a suite in a hotel in which the master bedroom had a glass platform of about 8 by 8 sticking about 2 feet outside the room over the valleys, which were hundreds of feet below us. Being an adventurous kid, I slept on that platform, the one that overlooked the hills and valleys. My dad slept on a bed, and my mother and sister in the other bedroom. It was around 1:30 at night. I was sleeping on my side facing the glass, which was around 3 inches from my face, and suddenly I opened my eyes to see a woman looking at me intently from the other side. I still remember her face was totally pale, her eyes dark, with black hair and a type of dark cloth on the body. I could only explain her gaze as of a lion before it jumps to kill its prey. It took me 3 to 4 seconds to realize where I was, and that this is not some human looking through a window, but some entity floating outside my room. I shouted as loud as I could and pushed myself back so hard from the glass, I ended up hitting the other end of the room by force. My dad woke up, turned all the lights on, but there was no one to be seen. That was the last time I ever slept with my window shades open in life. It's been 8 years since, but the incident and those terrifying eyes I will never forget. When I was in high school, the days before cell phones were common, my friends were to come over to pick me up from my house one night. We had made plans at school for them to pick me up at 7 p.m. At 6, my parents had said to come with them to do something, and I totally forgot to call my friends to tell them. They came to my house at 7 and called the house phone with no answer. There were 4 of them in the car, and they all told us the exact same story. They said that they were about to pull out of my driveway, but they saw someone peek through the blinds from the bedroom on the top right. That was my room, so they assumed I was messing around. 5 more times, they said that someone would peek through the blinds, and a few times they even saw the person's eyes. We got home at 7:10 to 7:15, and they were still on our driveway. One of my friends came over and said they thought that I was messing with them. They then asked me, "So who's staying in your room?" I told them no one. "So who's home in your house right now?" "No one." Their stone-cold faces told me that they had seen something. At first, we all thought there was a burglar, so we called the cops. They came and inspected the house. There were zero signs of a break-in. Nothing was touched, nothing was stolen, and our house had an alarm on it, so there's no way someone could have come into the house without setting it off. My friends, my family, and the cops all kind of stood around for a few minutes, trying to make sense of the situation. My friends swore up and down, and still do, that they couldn't have imagined what they saw. All four of them saw the same things, and it wasn't a particularly dark night, so their eyes couldn't have been playing tricks on them. To this day, none of us can make sense of that situation. So my family has always had something around in every house we lived in. So this house, the one we're currently in, has had some strange occurrences. Our beds would shake like a mini earthquake. My dad said he saw a predator camouflage outline in the trees watching us while checking what my dog was barking at. And we've had them choke us in the night. My sister used to crash in our living room when visiting from school. At this time I was unemployed and staying up until 4 a.m. every night playing video games. One night, I heard a loud gurgling, so I went to check it out with my dog, and my sister had tears in her eyes. She looked at me and points at the light, so I flick the switch, and she sits up gasping for air. I ask her what was wrong, and she didn't say a thing. She finally asked if she could use my bed, and I let her solely for being able to use the larger living room TV for myself. A few months later, I took a nap on the same couch at around 7, but woke up 15 minutes later to see two large glowing circles, eyes, red around the edges, yellow in the middle, and staring at me. I feel something pull me to the armrest, not fully being enough to realize I'm in some serious unexplainable stuff and could not speak, let alone scream for help. My right arm was slightly lifted, like it was putting me in a goddamn supernatural sleeper hold, but I had my phone in my left pocket and dialed my sister's number. I hear her voice and I start flicking the phone, tapping it until I see the hallway light turn on. She runs over and sees me tearing up and screams, "Stop!" at the top of her lungs, and I could finally breathe. We haven't slept in that room since, but I'm still interested in knowing what it was and why it was choking us. My brother works at a theater in Virginia, near a Civil War battle site, and all of the theater employees claim to see a Civil War era looking soldier just standing at attention in random places in the theater. They have a name for him, and my brother talks about him in projection rooms during the late night shift, which usually end at around 11:30 a.m. from the theater seating when he's cleaning. The older employees never mention it to the new ones because they don't want them to quit, as it's a failing theater, but the new ones always see it first and bring it up to the old ones. I was going on a bus trip to visit my cousin, and the night before, I laid out my favorite toque to wear on the bus. I woke up next morning and it was gone, completely vanished without a trace. I don't have time for this, so I leave without it. So I'm at my cousin's 1,000 kilometers away, and we're playing on a Ouija board. I jokingly ask it where my thing is, and it says that it's in the basement. My basement is known to be a quite creepy place, and most people get bad vibes from it. So I'm talking to my mum on the phone, and I tell her what the Ouija board says. She goes down to the basement and asks for it back, and the next morning my mum wakes up, makes her bed, has a shower, and when she comes out of the shower, it's sitting there on the pillow. Is this ghost just really fashionable? I worked in a movie theater when I was 17. On my first day, everyone was joking around about how the theater was haunted and trying to scare me. Sometime during this, the manager at the time goes upstairs to talk on the phone with her fiancé, as it's a really chilled out workplace. Our theater had 4 screens and a long dark hallway. There was a dark room with 4 old school projectors, and she was sitting on a desk that we used whenever a movie would inevitably mess up and the film would break. This desk was between projectors 2 and 3 on the opposite wall. About 5 minutes later, as we're all standing in concessions goofing off, we hear her running down the stairs. We turn to see why she's running, and she has this confused and angry sort of look on her face and asked us who went upstairs. At this point we were all confused, since nobody had left concessions at all, and she says she was chatting with her fiancé when she saw something out of the corner of her eye. She turns and sees the calves/feet of someone wearing blue jeans and white tennis shoes crawl behind projector 4, directly in front of the stairs. She told her fiancé she thought one of us was trying to scare her, so she walked over to find no one. The only people wearing jeans were myself, since I didn't have my khakis yet, and another guy I had been talking to the whole time this took place. Still gives me the chills, and lots of weird stuff has happened there. When I was a toddler, my mum tried to save an old woman's life after a car crash, but couldn't. The lady was bleeding out of the side of her head pretty bad and passed away before the ambulance arrived. The next day, my twin brother and I were in the car with our mum when my brother said that there was a grandma sitting in the passenger seat. I piped in and said that she had a boo-boo in her ear, and we told Mum that she wanted to go to the hospital. My mother, superstitious as she was, drove all the way to the hospital and dropped off the old lady there. Mum ended up staying at our grandma's for a week after that. My brother and I always played a game with our mum when she would ask us who was riding in the passenger seat with us on our way to daycare or wherever else. We'd usually say Spider-Man or some cartoon character, but that day was different. When our mum pulled up to the hospital, we told her that the old lady was asking my mum to walk her to the entrance. Once my mum opened the door, walked slowly to the entrance and opened the hospital door and walked back to the car, we both told her that the lady said thank you. My mum was never in the accident, by the way. She just came across the scene, as that's the kind of woman she is. She tried to help however she could. She's always just been very in touch with the paranormal. I have 2 stories, both when feeding neighbors' cats while they are on vacation. The first one is from the neighbor on the left. I was going to her cat's litter box, which was through a hallway, and I felt someone grab my shoulder hard and pull me back towards them. I was almost lifted off my feet, it was so strong. My mum was rooms away, and later we had that neighbor over for Christmas, and she told us that she thinks her mother and father's spirits were still in the house, and that they call her name sometimes. The second is the neighbor to the right. I was with another neighbor/friend, and we were about 14-ish. I wasn't the one getting paid, but it just was fun. The neighbor had 4 cats, and I was with 3 of them, and all of a sudden I heard my name. I thought it was my friend calling me, but she said it wasn't. And after she came and hung out with me on the couch, a minute later, 2 of the cat's hairs stand straight on their backs, and they ran into the bathroom and laid in the bathtub. Then I heard my name much louder. I left, and when I got home I told my parents, and they just kind of look at me. Turns out when I was a baby at about 2, before the other neighbors moved in, there was an older lady who lived there and used to love to play with me. She OD'd and fell asleep in the bathtub, and I do not cat sit anymore. A few months after my uncle ended his own life, I had a dream where he was talking to me on the phone. In the dream, he was telling me to tell his daughters that he loved them and that he missed them a lot, but he talked like he was away in the military rather than dead. I also kept hearing weird clicking in the background. When I woke up, I mentioned everything to my mum, and she told me that when he was in the Navy he did Morse code. No one had ever told me that before or even mentioned it since I was alive. So it was weird that I remembered that part of the dream so clearly and made enough of an impression to mention it to my mum. I just started working in a lab in August. Since I started, my co-workers have told me all sorts of paranormal activity that has happened. I listened to their stories, but never put much stock into it. One day, about 3 months into the job, it was late, and I was setting up a specimen and ended up staying behind as everyone else left. The hood I was using was in a corner, and I couldn't really see anything except what was right in front of me without turning my chair. Out of nowhere, I heard and felt footsteps rushing towards me. The lab is on the 3rd floor of a 4-story building, and the rest of the building is completely unoccupied, and a gust flew past me. I turned to look, and there was no one there. I was on my dirt bike riding along some railroad tracks when I came across a tunnel and thought, hey, that looks like a good picture. I pulled out my phone and took some images. When I was done, I looked down the tunnel and I could see the other side, and thought I saw what appeared to be a little girl in a white dress walking towards me. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I waited a second, and that's when I heard a voice directly in my left ear whisper, "They hurt me." Let's just say I didn't know that dirt bikes would go that fast after that. In 2016, we had to put down my cat, who was 16 years old. He lived a good life and was a very loving cat. In the middle of the night, I would often hear him walking down the hallway, calling out for someone, and as I was always the one to go comfort and cuddle him to reassure him that we were there, he would sleep next to my bed. I had a good connection with him. The night we put him down, I cried my heart out before I went to sleep. I heard him walk down the hallway one last time as he called out. I opened the door and saw him, and he purred, then walked away, and I didn't sleep that night. Earlier in the year, we had to give my dog to my grandmother, who lived 6 hours away from us. It hurt me to see him go, as I was always the one to protect him and comfort him when he broke his paw, and he would sleep in my room. He would always come to comfort me, because he was scared of my cats. And after a month, when he was with my grandmother, I had a dream of him, that he was on my lap, licked my hand, and then went to sleep, and I woke up. The next morning, my family sat me down and told me the news, that he had died from liver failure that night. 2016 was not a good year. When I was 12, my dog Lizzie, who was probably 12 as well at the time, became very sick. We took her to the vet and found out she had an aggressive tumor in her abdominal area that was quickly growing. She was having strokes, vomiting, and she was very fatigued. My mum let me miss school the next day if I wanted to, but I chose to go in order to get my mind off things, and so did my little brother. My older sister decided to stay home with my mum, and we all got in the car that morning with Lizzie, and she sat in the front of my sister's lap. After I got out the car at school, I started walking over to the window where she was sitting and gave her a kiss goodbye, because I didn't know if I'd get to see her again. I couldn't stop thinking of her all day. At around noon, right after lunch, I was in my maths class. I was sitting at my desk taking notes as my teacher gave her lesson as usual, and out of the blue, I felt what I can only describe as a punch to my heart, and I knew Lizzie was gone. I could almost feel her cuddling me in my lap one last time before she left. It was like she'd come to say goodbye. I came home later that day to find my mum and sister gave Lizzie the best last day a dog could have, and took her to the vet where she was put to sleep, which happened around noon. I knew it sounds cheesy, but that's the most paranormal thing I've ever personally experienced. Lizzie got sick so suddenly that we could hardly believe it. So treat every day with your animals for granted. You never know when it will be the last time you get to see them. I used to live in a building that was rumored to be haunted. It was a 5-story walk-up with 2 apartments on each floor. I lived in one of the apartments at the top floor, but only ever had small incidents that I thought were fairly explainable. I had a cat who'd I'd cared for since he was 2 months old, and by that time, he was 16 and dying of cancer. The vet was really nice, and came over to put him to sleep so he wouldn't have to go to the clinic. The night after he died, I woke up at 2 in the morning and could hear sounds like furniture being moved down the stairs, and thought someone was stealing the patio furniture that my neighbor and I kept on the roof. I ran out of bed, but when I opened the door there was no one there, but I could still hear the scraping and moving. I would have thought it was just a dream, but my neighbor came out of the apartment too and started crying out of fear. She also wanted to call the cops, but in the end decided they wouldn't take her seriously anyway. I went back to bed, but woke up around dawn and felt the spirit of my recently deceased cat jump up to the bed and climb up my leg and sit on my chest purring, exactly like he used to every day. I was fully awake, and he jumped off the bed, and I felt his presence disappear. Even if this was some kind of complex hallucination, I'm really glad I had it, because I loved that cat. I was in basic training at Fort Knox, and we were on a very long road march, when out of nowhere this beautiful yellow lab with no collar, that looks exactly like my dog at home, comes up to me and walks beside me, of all people, for a few minutes, before running back into the woods. This was a big boost to me, because you need to finish the march as one of the requirements to graduate, and I was dragging ass due to stress fractures in my feet. I was able to finish, and we earned some phone time to call home, where my mum informed me they had to put down my dog. She was sick before I left, and they were hoping that she would hold on another week, but she just got too bad. When that dog came up to me, literally out of nowhere, there weren't any houses around for miles. One of the things her and I loved to do was to go on runs together, so I like to think she was coming to say one last goodbye. My mum had a cat for 15 years before she had to put it down. The first pet she got after she and my dad got together. He'd cuddle, nurse on your neck, and talk to you. Really one of those forever kitten types. Every now and again, she'd still dream about him, little peaceful dreams where he'd usually do nothing more than sit on her lap, purring or kneading. Sometimes, when we were on the phone, my mum would say, "Sugar visited me again last night," in a nostalgic sort of way. I always kind of patronized her, until a very close friend of mine passed away due to brain cancer. He'd visit me in my dreams, talk to me, and do silly stuff like we always used to do together. One time, I got this kid to take swigs of gin, followed by bites from a block of cheddar. One time, I realized an entire road trip I'd taken on bus with him was just me traveling alone talking to myself. That was very cruel of him, to just disappear like that. I'm a writer, so although I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, I wrote to him in a journal he gave me for my birthday. I asked him to please stop visiting me. It was too much. It hurt. And just leaving me like that was like losing him all over again. The next night he came to see me one last time. He put his arm around me and said, "It's okay, I understand." And with that goofy, sad smile on his face, I cried on my shoulder and let myself feel the relief of saying goodbye. And I haven't seen him since. When I was 15, we had to put my cat down due to kidney failure. I still kept seeing him around the house for over a year after he passed. Some people might find some comfort in that, but it really creeped me out. I did not like it because I didn't believe in ghosts, but I kept seeing him on the back of the couch or sitting in a hallway, like I would look over and he'd be there, and then in the blink of an eye he'd be gone. I know the explanation is that it's just all in my head, because I'd seen him in those spots every day for 15 years, and it was just what my brain was expecting to see. And when we moved away, it finally stopped. I got my dog when I was 12, and she was 6. She was the best dog I will ever own. She passed away in 2013. I miss her every day and cannot talk about her without crying. Even this is making me tear up a little bit. Every once in a while I'll dream about her, and she will always just sit on my lap and I will pet her. Everything around me feels so foggy but her and I. It feels so real. I can feel her hair and hear her snoring, as she was a pug mix. When I was 15, I tried to end my own life by taking pills, and she kept barking and barking and barking. I made myself throw them up and apologized to her and cried. I tried again with a razor when I was 19, and she didn't stop barking until I stopped and held her, and I tried again last May. It was very surreal. I planned on jumping into the river, and I've never shared this with anyone, by the way. When I got out of my car, I swear I heard her barking. My feet were so incredibly heavy, and I went up to the river anyway. It was full of police and boats because someone had fallen in the night before, and they were looking for his body. I went home, and am doing much better now, but I haven't had a dream visit from her since that night. She sat in my lap again, and I woke up crying but feeling calm. I really do miss her. When I was 16, I would jump on my trampoline out back for hours every night. Literally hours. I would listen to my iPod and just daydream to get away from a rough family life. One night when I was jumping, a kid ran past our fence at full speed carrying a box about the size and shape of a skateboard. He ran to the park behind my house and held it by the edge and tossed it into the air, so that it flipped a few times before landing on the ground. At this point I was a little weirded out, because he was just standing over it, staring for a pretty long time. Then out of nowhere, he just bolts full speed back past our fence like he didn't even notice I was there. Alright, that's a bit weird. I just kept jumping and staring at where the box was. Here's where it gets creepy. The box looked like it was moving. Then something started to rise out of it. I actually stopped jumping and rubbed my eyes and watched as it looked like a fully grown man rose out of the box that was 2 inches thick. He had an elongated head with no hair. His skin was orange and his eyes were huge and pitch black. He raised one arm up to his side, and the box just kind of went into what I can only describe as a trench coat. He walked over to the only pavilion we have at the small park, grabbed the metal beam holding up the overhang, and began to bang his head onto the beam over and over. At this point, I rubbed my eyes a few times and couldn't even move. I had no idea what I was seeing. Then, without warning, he just stopped, and his head quickly whipped around and stared at me. It was like he could feel me watching him. A giant, and I mean a giant smile came across his face, and those dark eyes just stared at me. He tilted his head back and forth a few times, and I had goosebumps and my eyes began tearing up. Even typing this makes my hair stand on edge, because I will never forget that look. As I was about to start crying, he turned around and kind of phased down the road into the distance. He was gone. That was it. I bawled my eyes out and sprinted inside and called my best friend, who assured me I was just seeing things and needed to calm down. I'm sure I sound insane and no one will believe me, but that is the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. My brother and I shared a very old house here in a small mountain town in Colorado. Sadly though, my brother has since passed. The entire house was severely out of date and drab. It was an odd layout, and the basement, well, that's a whole different story. But the whole house seemed to vibrate with dark vibes and energy. The lamps and overhead lights never seemed to brighten the rooms enough to make you feel comfortable. I've had many friends and a few boyfriends comment on the creepy presence of the outside and the physical difference the house gave off when you were inside it. I have had countless seemingly unexplained happenings that could go on all night, but for now, this is the creepiest. My brother passed away in the house in 2011. His girlfriend in 2009, and 2 dogs died in the house before I finally moved out. This story is about my brother's first dog, Duke, who passed away first. He was an elderly black mixed dog, sweet as could be, and always on my side. The other dog was Gunner, a black lab that was much younger than Duke. Well, the day came that Duke died of old age. He walked into my room with his swollen tongue and dropped to the floor and took his last struggling breaths in my bedroom. We were all very sad, of course, and life went on. My brother's bedroom and mine were right next to each other at the end of a long hallway, with a bathroom to the side of the kitchen and living room at the end of the hallway. One night, I came out of bed, opened my door into the dark hallway, and proceeded down the long hallway to the kitchen. Gunner usually sits at my brother's doorframe to keep an observing eye on my brother and myself, and the happenings of the house. So when I started down the hallway into the dark, I heard and felt Gunner trot down the hallway from behind me, swipe my seat pant leg as he trotted by, and I heard him make his way to the kitchen. I get to the light switch at the end of the hall, and to my surprise, there is Gunner completely passed out on the couch under a blanket. That was not the Gunner who ran past me, and it still gives me chills remembering this story. My aunt, who was like my second mum, died suddenly when I was 3. Even though she was young, we were close, and I still remember her very well. A few years after she died, I was sleeping in my mum's bed and woke up for some reason. Lying across from me, I saw my aunt looking at me and smiling. I remember it so vividly. She had this white glow coming off her, and she was outlined in gold. It was amazing. I remember she gave me a hug and told me that it was going to be okay and to go back to sleep. It was so peaceful when I closed my eyes, and I woke up in the morning and she was gone. I told my mum, and she said Auntie probably paid me a visit. It was surreal. My wonderful wife worked in an assisted living home for many years. She became very close to her residents and was somehow connected to many of them. One Friday evening, we were at a restaurant having our date night dinner, and she suddenly straightened up, put her hand on her throat and said, "Oh no, John, no." I asked her what was wrong. "John, he just died." And then a moment later she said, "Oh no, don't do that. Let him go." I wrote down the time, consoled her and went home. She called work. Jonah died at the exact time she reacted, 10 miles away, and they had to perform CPR because he did not have a DNR order on file, and brought him back, breaking his sternum as usual, and he finally died in my wife's arms 2 days later. I had always wondered about my wife's psychic abilities. I have learned through the years not to question them, but this time was the first I ever got solid proof. She's a special lady, and I'm very lucky to have been married to her for 32 years. My aunt raised me after my mother died, and for the last 4 years after her own death, I'm convinced she was trying to contact me. I've heard my name whispered in the middle of the night. I've been touched several times. I've woken up to find blankets that were folded up on the chair in my room to be placed over me. I've heard someone walking in my house when I'm alone, and my dog is cuddled next to me. Someone who was house-sitting asked if there was a blonde woman that lived near me, as they had seen her silently standing in the yard when they came to feed my pets. My aunt was blonde, but my neighbors are not. What needs to be understood is that it was very sudden and quick when my aunt passed. She was unconscious and drifting towards death before she even knew what was happening. We were also very codependent on each other, and we did everything together, lived together, watched TV together. She was my best friend, and I wasn't able to be there when she passed, as she died while I was on the way, and never got to say goodbye. Now, as I've seen so many horror movies before all this, it could be a demon trying to mess with my heartstrings and eat my soul. But who knows? Maybe she's just watching over me. This is my friend's story. Her dad ended his own life when he was in college. Her uncle, her dad's brother, and her dad were in a huge fight, to the point of not speaking to each other. The uncle felt super guilty about being on bad terms when his brother did that. Fast forward to a few months later. It was 3 a.m. and her uncle got a phone call from a random number. He realized after a few moments that it was his brother's old cell phone number, and he immediately called the number back. A very groggy woman answered the other line. He tells her that she just called him, and she swears up and down that she did not. She even checked her recent calls, and the uncle's number didn't show. They were both pretty freaked out, but they hung up. Fast forward a few months later, the same thing happens. This time the uncle doesn't call her back. He just decides to go to the next day to the AT&T to block the number from calling him. So the next day he goes in and tells them the story. The employee all of a sudden gets really quiet and sort of pale, and proceeds to tell my uncle that a few months ago, when the first phone call happened, the woman was so scared by his story she asked for a different phone number. The phone number now belongs to no one and had been disconnected for months. They think that it was my dad's way of telling his brother that he forgave him. They still have no explanation as to why the number called my uncle in the first place, though. When I was about 2, my grandfather died. I was too young to remember, but I heard stories about how he adored me, and he loved me tirelessly. I'd visit him or he would visit me almost every day. He sometimes refused to let my dad hold or play with me until the visit was over. He loved me very much. After he passed, our dog went nuts. Before we even found out about his passing, our dog Casey became very violent, and my mum was forced to put him down. He was attacking people, and she was afraid for me since I was so little. The dog was awesome though before it happened. It was really weird. A few days after he passed, my mum put me to bed, cleaned up my room, and put my toys in the closet. The door was closed, and I was in my crib asleep when she left the room. She swears to this day that she heard me babbling from my crib and it was non-stop. She came back upstairs, and I was somehow sitting on the floor with the closet door wide open staring at it. She asked who I was talking to and I said, "Bampa," and she was very freaked out. When I turned 5, I lost Piggy. He was a stuffed little pig that I'd play with, and I took him everywhere I went. I went to bed with him, woke up with him, and one day when I awoke he was gone, and nobody could find him anywhere. I cried for days, but there was nowhere that he could have gone missing either. It was very strange, and my sister kept telling me that Grandpa took him. And the final piece that I personally remember that still freaks me out. I was 7 and woke up in the middle of the night wanting a glass of water. I didn't want to wake my parents, so I left the lights off, and as I made my way downstairs, I took a hard slip and was about to smash my face against the bottom, when all of a sudden I feel something or someone catch me. It was like floating down the stairs, slowly. When my feet hit the floor at the bottom of the stairs, I snapped back to reality. I know this wasn't a dream because I vividly remember running back up the stairs to try and replicate what happened, and nothing did. I never told anyone for fear of being made fun of and people thinking I'm crazy, but I suspected it was Grandpa. And to top it all off, about 6 months ago I visited my mum, and we got on the subject of my grandpa. I then told her about the stories from the first time, and she went white as a ghost. My sister had similar experiences when we were younger. This was a few years after my story happened, but still, and she did tell my mum. She was also caught and put in a terrace after almost falling down the stairs, floating until safe. I was never aware, and she didn't know my story either. You wouldn't believe any of this, but my family swears by it, and it's the only real paranormal experience I can recall. Thanks, Grandpa Lou, for looking out for us. Me and my mother were in the same dream. Sort of. You see, in my dream, I saw my deceased grandmother, and she and I were talking at a room in our house, located on the 2nd floor. I can't remember what exactly we were talking about, but I remember I was asking for forgiveness for something. I sense that there are other relatives waiting outside the door, as if they're lining up to talk to my grandmother also. But it was not a sad mood. It felt festive, in fact, like one of her parties, as she loved to entertain when she was alive. I remember that I recognized people at the party, old relatives like my grandmother, that were already dead. I didn't tell my mum about it because she's superstitious and all, and she likes to make a big deal out of these things. But 2 days later, as we were eating breakfast, she told me that she dreamt of her mother-in-law, my grandmother, and here's where the part gets weird. In her dream, she was outside of her house, and she knew that there was a gathering inside, like a party. She caught a glimpse of my grandmother and our dead relatives at the gathering. She knew there was a party inside, and she refused to enter the house, thinking in her dream that she didn't belong there. If she had decided to come in, would she have found me inside? It creeped both of us out. The coincidence was uncanny. It wasn't as if we talked about my grandmother in recent times that might have triggered the dream. What's more creepy was that she didn't even know about my dream, and yet in 2 consecutive nights, we managed to dream about the almost same event. So my grandparents have had this house since 1974, and have always felt a strange presence in the home, according to what they've told me. I'm 17 years old, and have also always felt a strange presence, like a dark energy in the house, since a very young age. In 2010, my grandparents' son, my uncle, ended his own life in the house. Before he did this though, he had tried to do the same thing in his teen years, and ended up going blind after not being successful. He'd had a rough life, but he seemed like he was always very happy, and my 8-year-old self had no idea what had happened when I found out that he had passed. After that, the house became increasingly more active. Footsteps at night, shadows across walls, and things being misplaced. When we know, we put them somewhere else. Things got bad quickly. This lasted until we had a priest come and bless the house in 2011, and it seemingly stopped. Nothing happened anymore until recently. And then things have gotten strange again. I made a bad mistake and taunted the entities and put my hand on a lamp near me as I was doing it. Sparks flew up from the lamp, and I was pretty terrified, as that's never happened before. Most of my recent experiences were just last week. I was up at around 3 a.m. when everyone was asleep. I was on the family computer trying to get work done when I heard 3 or 4 loud footsteps and turned to where the noise was coming from and saw a shadow figure moving across the wall. I checked from where it came from and no one was there. Everyone was asleep in the house except me. I was obviously freaked out a little, but continued on doing work because it didn't bother me too much. My grandmother is absolutely certain something is watching her at night, and she claims she heard a growl when she was in the kitchen one time late at night. My grandfather dismisses everything she says and always tries to come up with a natural explanation for it. Here I am today, just wanting to know other people's opinion on what you think of my creepy situation. I'm from Texas and was planning on moving to Ohio to live with my mum. But before I moved, she told me that when she was in the house one time by herself at midday, that she heard a growl come from upstairs. She said she ran upstairs yelling and checking all the rooms. I honestly thought she was joking, but about a month later I moved in and started school. So there were times I was home by myself and everything was just normal. I hadn't heard anything, so I started to think she was just full of it, and scared because she was by herself with the accompaniment of her boyfriend every now and then. I just finished a study sesh at the library at around 7:30, and my mum said she was working late. By the time I got home it was 7:45, and during winter the sun was already set. I went inside. Only the kitchen light was on, and I began eating a snack while leaning against the counter. I looked towards the dining room where it was dark and started to feel uneasy. So I went to go turn on the light as I was walking back, and I passed the stairs, and it sounded like someone was running down them. So I assumed it was the neighbors or the house settling. Then I started walking past the couch and heard heavy breathing, like if someone literally just got through running a marathon. I decide to ignore it and go back to the kitchen to finish my snack. As soon as I lean against the counter, something growled at me from the other side of the wall. I stopped what I was doing, and I was slightly peeking around the corner, and it growled at me again, but louder this time. I ran out to my car and sat in it watching the house for the next 2 hours until my mum came home. I told her what happened, and she believed me, but her boyfriend just laughed to my face. It's been a good 7 months, and we've heard the growl twice since then, and have felt an awfully dark energy towards the area of the dining and living room. I grew up in a 2-family house for the first 10 years of my life. My best friend lived upstairs, and after my family had sold our part of the house to another family and moved, I'd often visit him. One time when visiting, I saw the woman who bought our part of the house and currently lived there at the time. We made small talk, and when she asked me if I remembered seeing a woman in my room, I tell her no. She tells me that my parents told her about me complaining about a woman in a white dress by my bed when I was a kid. According to her, my parents mentioned it when selling the house. She also tells me that her son is now seeing the same woman and that he's afraid of her. I disregard it and sleep uneasily that night. The next morning I ask my parents about it, and they completely ignore it. They don't say if it's true or untrue, they just say nothing. I'm not sure to this day what happened, but I sure hope that the lady that lived in my old house was joking. This happened twice to me, both of which occurred when I was about 4 or 5 years old. The first time I was laying in bed with the lights on, about to go to sleep. The door closed, blinds closed, and my bedroom is on the 2nd floor of your typical house. Right beside the bed, I saw the shadow of a man creeping silently. I stared at it for 5 to 10 seconds until it mysteriously vanished through the wall. No one was in my bedroom but me. And I should mention, I wasn't scared or had any negative feelings of this presence. The second time was much the same, but I was on top of my stairs playing with action figures as I heard a noise. I looked down the stairs, and the same type of shadow man was creeping through the hallway. Only my mum and I were home at the time, and my mum was asleep in her room, which was at the top of the stairs. The way the angle was, and how the stairs are situated, it could have been anyone walking near the stairs, like a burglar. Once again, I wasn't scared of this presence. I just didn't understand what it was or what it meant. I just knew it wasn't the ordinary, and definitely wasn't human. I lived in this house for a good 20 more years, and never witnessed anything again. Just random acts where my dogs would bark at nothing. One night, I had this rough dream where my friend came up to me hysterically about his dad being gone and was having a terrible time. It was one of those dreams that looked and felt real, but the moment you wake up, you realize it wasn't true. Fast forward a few hours later, and I was sitting next to the kid I dreamt about, in the same way we always did, before going out to football practice in the 105-degree heat. And for some reason, I turned to help and told him about the dream and described it thoroughly to him. and as I did so, with a stone-cold face, he said to me that today is the 10-year anniversary since his dad left his family. And up until that point, I'd never known anything about his father or when he left his family. It was creepy. My first story happened when I was working part-time in a town called Franschhoek on the Western Cape of South Africa. I was staying at an old boarding house on the outskirts of town. There were 2 houses on the property. The oldest was the main residence that was still in the old Cape Dutch style and was where the owners lived. The other was hired out to boarders. It was not as old, having built in the mid-1800s. The room I stayed in had an old-fashioned wardrobe against the wall, where I kept my clothes. It was very peaceful, with a terrific view of the town from the window. There was a communal bathroom halfway down the opposite passage. One night I had just turned out the bedside light when I saw a figure approaching the foot of my bed. At first I thought it might be one of the other residents, and I switched the light back on again. The moment I did this, the figure seemed to disappear. I put the light out again, and there it was, right in the spot where I had first seen it. Strange as it seems, I felt no fear at the time, and decided to see what would happen next. The figure was definitely female, dressed in what looked like a nightgown. She started to pirouette in front of me, and then fell to the floor. I turned the light on again, and of course there was no one there. "Come on, dude," I chided myself. "You're seeing things." And I fell asleep soon after that. I didn't say anything the next morning, as I was still convinced that it was just a dream, and was, until it happened, almost a week later. Only this time, I noticed a detail that had escaped my attention before. If the figure had been one of the boarders, she would have had to have come through my door, which was directly in front of my bed. Even with the passage light off, I would have noticed it because the bathroom light shone slightly into my room and was always on. The entity came from the side of my room where the wardrobe stood, and on both occasions the cupboard doors were closed. The same sequence of events played out before me, but this time I did not bother putting the light on. I spoke to the owner the next morning, and she told me that my room once had a bathroom attached. It had been removed so that the room next to mine could be built. To my astonishment, I was also informed that the door was just behind the wardrobe. She said she didn't know much about the history of the place, so she couldn't shed any light on what I had seen. Intrigued, I asked around and was finally introduced to an elderly gent who lived in the senior citizens' home. He said that back in the 1940s, the room was occupied by a young girl from Cape Town. She was a ballet dancer, but was forced to stop because she had cancer. It was so bad that the other residents could see her get worse on an almost daily basis. She loved dancing, and even when she was so sick she could hardly stand, she would try a step or two. And one morning, someone found her lying in the middle of the floor. She was dead. Someone said that he was certain that she tried to dance before collapsing. I will leave you to your own opinion of what I saw. My second encounter. A close friend and I began helping people who had been troubled by occurrences that they could not explain. Many of these ended up being more of a counseling session or suggesting that they seek professional or medical help. But there were others that truly were paranormal. By the time this incident occurred, we had gathered quite a large group, with myself and Tom, as well as 2 others being the core. One of them, Mark, was a sensei and a Buddhist. One of the members of his dojo approached him, saying that there was something causing a disturbance in the commune that he was running, and so Mark passed the information on to the rest of the group. Tom and I met with the fellow, who we called Eddie, and discovered that he was an ex-British Marine. He had toured in Afghanistan and Iraq before sustaining a serious injury that ended his career in the armed forces. He was also a high-ranking member of the local Freemasons Lodge. Having gone through the house, we discovered a hot spot, or rather, cold spot, in the passage next to one bathroom. I set up a barrier of salt around this area to try and contain whatever might be there, and left strict instructions that no one must interfere with it. It consisted of a pentacle with 5 quartz crystals, one at each point, and we agreed to meet again the following day. And Eddie would tell the other occupants to leave the house that night, and only to come back once we had done what needed to be done. The next morning, we were told that Martin, our 4th member, would be late because of car trouble. The 3 of us decided that we would begin without him. The first sign that something was definitely wrong happened just after we arrived. Tom went to the bathroom checking my salt barrier en route, and it was still intact. Mark, Eddie and I were the only other people in the house. When Tom came out, however, the crystals had been removed and were now neatly lined up against a closed door at the opposite end of the passage. I had to reset the barrier. Not long after that, Mark came and told me that the pentacle had been tampered with again. That was when we decided to try and track whatever was doing these things down. We could definitely sense whenever it was near. Just like the spot in the passage, it would suddenly turn cold, as if an icy wind had brushed past it. Tom and Mark headed down the passage that had a bend in it to the left, while Eddie and I waited at the opposite end, near where the salt barrier was. Eddie whispered that he had sensed something, and headed forward to where the turn in the passage was. He was wearing a Kevlar vest. I was tail-end Churley, and suddenly I heard a low grunt, followed by a dull thud next to me, and there was Eddie flat on his back, his face white as a sheet. "What just happened?" I asked. "Something hit me," came the reply. By this time, Tom and Mark had come to see what was going on. We helped Eddie back to his feet and headed to the sitting room. We thought it best to wait until Martin arrived before we continued. Eddie was complaining that his chest was sore. When he removed his flak jacket, to our horror, we could all see what looked like 2 claw marks across from his shoulder to almost the middle of his ribcage. The skin wasn't broken, but there were 2 parallel welts where he had been struck. As I said, this was a hardened, battled Marine, and he was so spooked that he was shaking. He said, "I've dealt with many bad things before, but most of them I could see. This was the first time I was assaulted by something I could not." Martin arrived soon after, and we eventually got rid of whatever it was. But it took a guy with many more years' experience in the paranormal than us in order to succeed. 2 years after my dad had passed away, I was living in Oregon for the first time, and decided to take a day trip to see the Painted Hills. But this trip was further than I had planned, and being in the dead of winter, the weather was horrible. Freezing fog made visibility near zero, and I headed back towards Portland, and rather than risking hitting snow in the mountains, I veered north through the desert. Unfortunately, conditions in the desert were the same. I couldn't see a thing. There were no other cars on the highway, and in stretches where there were no reflectors, I'd find myself drifting far off the road. To make matters worse, I hadn't slept well the night before, and was starting to fall asleep at the wheel. My CD player wasn't working, and there had been no radio for an hour. Just static, fog, and darkness, lulling me into deadly delirium. Me crashing my car had pretty much been my dad's worst nightmare. It was the thing we talked about most when it came to safety. I will also mention here that my dad loved the band Chicago, which we gave him a lot of grief for. Because suddenly, in the middle of nowhere, the radio signal came back, which is good because my eyes were closed and I was off the road asleep. I was awoken to the sound of voices. A song. The lyrics went, "You're the meaning in my life. You're my inspiration." And I felt like my dad was with me. I rolled down the window so the freezing air could keep me awake, and I turned up the radio as loud as I could and shouted that song all the way through. I started crying. The song ended and the signal faded back to static. I know how unlikely that sounds, but it happened that way. I might have just been driving back behind some hills and lost signal rapidly, but it happened right when the song ended, and I didn't even hear a radio call sign. I made it back home safely. I don't pretend to draw any certain conclusions about what happened. I just know the music came on in time to save my life before I left the road completely. This is circa 2001 to 2003 in Morgantown, Indiana, at a place called Auntie M's Tea Room, which sadly no longer exists. On 3 separate occasions while cleaning up after closing time, I heard what sounded like a small child crying. It was soft, and every time I tried to walk towards the sound, it seemed to grow further away, or at least move to a different part of the restaurant altogether. It was unnerving to say the least. A friend of mine worked there with me, and once after hours she heard me call her name from inside the stockroom, and at the time I heard her call her name from the front of the restaurant. We ran into each other on our way to answer the calls. We were both very confused when we realized neither of us had actually called each other. Lastly, and most chillingly, 2 people I knew passed away very shortly after eating at Auntie M's, and I was the person that served them their last meals on both occasions. One passed in an accident, and the other of a heart attack. Was it just their time to go? I don't know. But it really creeped me out that in that restaurant, I've served 2 people their last meals on Earth. A year before my son was born, my boyfriend's father died. I'd never met him before, but heard stories of his twisted sense of humor and how he liked to mess with people. My boyfriend wasn't particularly close to his dad. We lived together in North Carolina, and his dad had taken off to Seattle when my boyfriend was young. I don't think my boyfriend really grieved until our son was born, and he realized that his dad would never meet him. That hit him hard. Over the first month of caring for our newborn, we started to notice screws that had fallen out of household items. Kitchen chairs, towel racks, screen doors, outlet covers. The most random stuff. More than a dozen loose screws in the span of a week. Kind of weird, but we were sleep-deprived parents and didn't really have the mental stamina to waste trying to figure it out. One day we were chilling in the living room, and a screw falls out of the light fixture and lands in my boyfriend's lap. He starts laughing hysterically so hard he can't breathe. When he finally calms down, he tells me what set him off, and he holds the screw up and said, "I finally get it. My dad is screwing with me." We never had a loose screw since. I moved into a new house about a decade back. Apparently the last owners were really into the occult. I never met them personally, but they left a handful of little voodoo dolls pinned throughout with their heads up in the corners of the basement and other rooms. I spent the first night taking down as many as I could. Those things were a nightmare to come across in the dark. I think they had a rat skull or something in the doll. Anyway, it's not terribly supernatural, but the last one I took down was shaking like nuts, like it was blowing in a really strong wind. I didn't even touch that one, just pulled it down with pliers and threw it out, and had really bad nightmares from the next few days. And I'm not prone to dreams at all. One time, I drove back to college after Christmas, but before the winter break was over, so I was the first of my roommates to get back to the house we were renting. Our house was in a pretty isolated spot on the outskirts of a town in upstate New York. I pulled into the driveway behind the house and went to the trunk and grabbed one of my bags and then ran inside, because I had to use the bathroom badly, as I'd been on the road for 5 hours. I was inside the house using the bathroom for about 5 minutes, and after I went back outside to get the rest of my stuff from the car, there were footprints in the snow all around it. Now, as I said, I was alone in the middle of nowhere. The only set of footprints should have been mine from where I'd gotten out of the car on the driver's side and walked to the trunk, and then walked to the back door. Yet now, there was another set of footprints circling the car, and then leading into the woods at the back of the property. It appeared that the footprints had originally come from the woods as well. I had left my trunk open when I was inside because I assumed I was alone, and nothing had been taken. But someone had seen me arrive, come out of the woods, circled my car, and gone back in. I grabbed the rest of my stuff, locked my car, ran into the house, and locked the doors. About 4 years ago, we heard my grandmother fell and hit her head and wasn't going to make it. We drove 4 hours south to get to see her one last time. My mum was distraught. She was riding back with some other family. My sister had to drive us home. We were pulling off on the side road, and I can't remember what we were doing over there, but we were waiting for cars to pass so that we could do a U-turn. I turn around and look to see a car approaching. My sister then says, "I'm gonna hit this car." I thought she was messing around or something. Then as the car starts to pass us, my sister hits the gas and swerves into it. Amazingly, we didn't actually hit it. The other driver had insane reflexes and swerved us around, and didn't even honk or stop. My sister instantly started to freak out and said she didn't see it. I was confused. I told her what she told me, but she had no memory of saying that. She then burst into tears saying she didn't see it, and she didn't say that. But my brother in the back seat confirmed we both heard her say it. To this day we don't know what happened, but she claims she didn't say that, nor see the other car. Senior year of college. My best friend Emma and I are living together in an apartment. Just us two in a 2-bedroom. One day, the key to our mailbox that she swears she remembers putting at our table by the door disappears. She had an important piece of mail coming later, so she'd placed it there specifically so that she could run out of the mailbox when she got home from class. We searched the house after and looked everywhere, and finally, after a few weeks, we decided that one of us must have lost it, and we finally had to ask our landlord for a new one. It was just an annoying household mystery, until one night a few months later. Emma is a super spiritual person, claiming she can feel presences and stuff like that. Personally, I thought it was bull. For example, she has always claimed that when she passes under a streetlight in her car, it flickers off while she's below it, and comes back on when she's looking at it in her rearview mirror. I can always tell how dumb that sounds, but she's below the light so you can see it. She was driving home one night along a long street, and the streetlight phenomenon kept happening to her. She arrived at our place, and immediately mentioned the streetlight thing was in full force, and she felt like she had a presence with her. I literally said out loud, "Why would a ghost be able to change the lights, Emma?" Right as I said that, the lights in our apartment went out for 10 seconds and turned back on. Needless to say, we were both scared, and we freaked out for a while and finally calmed down. I turned on a Spotify playlist, and we settled in for the evening, chatting over glasses of wine. About 10 minutes after the light incident happened, the speaker starts playing static in the middle of a song. I'd never heard this speaker have this kind of problem before, and hasn't had it since. I rushed over to turn the speaker off, but the static stopped abruptly, and my phone randomly put on a different song from my playlist. Before I reached the speaker, I had chills again. The new song was called Ghosts. We finally calmed down enough to go to bed and wake up the next morning. A friend of ours comes over and we're making a little brunch. My friend is throwing cinnamon rolls in the oven and asks us, "Why is there a key in your oven?" The mysteriously vanishing mail key was literally balanced across the rack in the oven. Not on the bottom of the oven. This tiny key was sitting on 2 wires in the oven perfectly. Literally, there's no way it could have just fallen and landed in there like that. It had to have been put in there purposely by someone. We moved out about a month later, but there were no more surprises. I'm still a huge skeptic, but even I have to admit that I can't explain the events of that night and morning. My friend asked me if I would go to her house after work to feed her dog, as she would not be able to make it until 3 a.m, as she worked in a bar. I get to her house at 8:30 p.m. I have the key she left under the mat, unlock the door, and once I'm in I turn off the alarm and put the key in a white bowl by the door, and I'm 100% sure that's where I put it. I feed the dog, play with him for a little while, and when I went to lock up the house again, the key was gone. Just then the dog started furiously barking and ran full speed out of the kitchen and up the stairs. He just sat there growling at nothing. The feeling that eventually came over me at the time was so strange. I randomly burst out crying and couldn't stop. Eventually I calmed down, put the dog back in the kitchen, and looked for the key. It was literally nowhere. I ended up finding another key that worked, so I just locked the house and left. I told my friend, and she looked for a week, but couldn't find it. Then one day, the key was back in the white bowl. In 2008, we renovated our house after buying it. We painted the cabinet doors in the kitchen and laid them out to dry. When it came time to hang them, 2 were missing. We searched everywhere but couldn't find them. I ordered replacements, but never got around to putting them up. We just got too used to the middle cabinets being shelves. About a year and a half go by, and I decided to paint the replacement doors and put them up. I painted them, then got busy at work and never got around to putting them up. Less than a year ago, I searched everywhere looking for the doors. I finally found them in the attic, leaning across the access to a way that caused them to fall out of the attic when I opened the access. I cannot remember the last time I went into the attic before then. My wife can't even reach the access pull, so I know it couldn't have been her to put them up there. We've still not found the original doors, nor do we know how these got up there. Creepy. I am from Morocco. Moroccans think that jinns must be living in the land of the jinns because of the numerous incidences and encounters and real witchcraft stuff that happens here. Almost everyone in Morocco has at least 10 stories to share. I have a few as well, from watching possessed people speaking different languages to getting to see an entity with my own eyes. This one happened a few months ago. One night I was awake watching movies at 4 a.m. when my brother started knocking on the door like crazy. I opened the door and he was gasping. He went straight to the window and looked through, trying to see if anyone was there. It took a while for him to calm down and tell me what happened. He was walking home and it was late, so the streets were empty and quiet. He tried to take a shortcut by going through this alley, so by the time he got there, he saw something in the alley. He told me that there was this old man in white, with long white hair and a long white beard in white clothes. It kind of reminded me of Gandalf, but anyway. This man was actually frozen. He was standing in the middle of the alley looking up, and not moving at all at 4 a.m. My brother stopped and stared at a distance, and suddenly this guy turned his head so fast and stared back at my brother, and he had no facial expressions when he began running towards him. He was running so fast, it was impossible for a man his age. My brother fled, and didn't stop running nor looking back until he got home. I used to have a penchant for wandering around abandoned buildings when I was in high school. One time a friend and I decided it would be a good idea to explore a farmstead that hadn't been in use for years. The whole experience was really bizarre. The farmstead was accessible by a long gravel road that brought you to a cluster of dilapidated buildings around a central barn. We parked at the end of a gravel road and turned off to the main road so that we could walk around the property and just pull out quickly later. We went into the barn first, and there were deer bones arranged in a circle around the skull, and a bunch of blankets and wood stacked in a corner of the room. We thought it was really cultish and weird, and noped out of there and began making our way back to the car. Halfway down the gravel road we heard crunching, heavy footsteps, and someone screeching behind us, a blood-curdling scream. We sprinted back to my car and tried to peel out of there as fast as possible, but it had snowed the night prior, and my back tire was stuck in a puddle of melted snow. My friend was screaming because she was freaked out and wouldn't turn to look at the path behind us. By the time I had gotten the car unstuck, she turned around to see if there was something following us, but there was nothing there. It could have been a bird or something, but we both swear up and down to this day that something was following us. I actually thought I was going to die that day. I used to go exploring abandoned places with my friends. The weirdest experience was at this abandoned amusement park we went to. The last time we had been there, a skeleton of a cat had fallen from a ceiling tile inside one of the buildings and freaked out my friend, but I wasn't there, so I didn't know much about that. But this park has a long walk to get to the entrance, and the gate has been bent just enough so that you could step through it at a right angle. So we walk probably a mile across a field to get to the gate and step inside. The first building is some sort of storefront type thing. We walked up to it, and one of my friends notices a light coming from inside, and we all fall silent as he steps forward to peek in. He looks back wide-eyed, and naturally, the urban exploring rest of us go over to the doorway and check out what he saw. The whole wall opposite us was on fire. It looked like it had been lit no less than 10 minutes before we got there, and we straight sprinted back to our cars after that. Freaky stuff. I sometimes have precognitive dreams, like my father dying, only to have him fall off a roof and shatter his pelvis and die almost a week later after having the dream. The one that gets me though is the dream where my girlfriend and I were walking through the streets of New York City. Well, it was a world of white, but one New York City building was in this space. A large crowd with their eyes to the sky. We walked up to them and asked them what they're looking at. Someone in the crowd says they're gonna jump off the building. My girlfriend and I look up to see a shadowy figure that we can't make out the gender or race of, but it's human. We see this person walk off the edge, and I cover my girlfriend's eyes and close mine whilst turning my head to the floor. All of a sudden, a voice that only I can hear tells me, "I need to watch. There's a reason you need to see this." I watch as this bottom explodes on the ground, and I wake up. I also wake up my girlfriend and tell her this story and eventually fall back to sleep. The very next day, meaning the morning after the dream, I go to work and the doorman of the building tells me about a girl who jumped off the building. I ask questions, but he saw it and was obviously in a state of shock from the event. I go home and find out it was an old high school classmate I knew. We weren't in the same circle of friends, but we did have some mutual friends. I once saw a will-o'-the-wisp. For those who don't know, it's a light seen at night in desolate areas of the countryside, hovering in the distance like a ghostly lantern. It's one of the most widespread legends in the world, having many different versions in a variety of cultures, and is believed to be a ghost or demon. Scientifically speaking, the most plausible explanation regards to the decomposition of certain chemicals in a corpse, often cattle, that creates phosphoric acid which can create a light. However, when you're in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night, fight or flight gives very few cares to science. Before I was born, my dad's older brother had drowned in a river a year or two prior, and he was driving back home to the family farm, which is about 20 minutes out of town. On the way back between the city and our farm is where his older brother was buried. He was driving home after a night out, and he said he could kind of feel himself start to fade into sleep. He was driving past the cemetery where my uncle was buried, and he heard a voice say, "Man, I'm tired." He immediately perks up and looks over to see his brother sitting in the passenger seat of the car before he sort of fades away. He said he was wide awake after that. I've never known my dad to lie in my entire life, so I'm very inclined to believe him. We've talked years later about other times we had seen certain things in the house I grew up in as well as that, but we couldn't explain it, nor some of the other things. This didn't happen to me, but to my father-in-law and two brother-in-laws. The family I married into loves to hunt. I now love to hunt as well. My father-in-law had a friend that allowed us to hunt on his land near Jacksboro, Texas. My father-in-law's mother lived nearby, so when we went to hunt, we stayed with her. On this particular trip, my father-in-law and two brother-in-laws went hunting. So they get to my father-in-law's mother's mobile home, and eventually they all head to bed. My grandmother-in-law heads to her room, and my father-in-law and brothers-in-laws sleep in sleeping bags in the living room. The mobile home was being renovated, and I heard what you just thought, so there wasn't anywhere else to sleep. Previously, this house was abandoned when she bought it. The rooms were spray-painted black and had red pentagrams everywhere. According to her, there was a spirit there, but it didn't bother her. Everyone was just like, "Sure, Grandma, whatever." So everyone's asleep. The two brother-in-laws are on the floor, and my father-in-law was on the couch. One of my brother-in-laws wakes up because he got really cold and left a draft. I checked the doors and windows and they were all shut, so he laid back down and tried to go to sleep. But for some reason he still felt ice cold. My second brother-in-law begins to stir and notices that his brother's awake, and they comment to each other that it's very cold in the room. All of a sudden, a strong gust of icy cold wind blows through the room. It had come through the front window, and blew the curtains out into the room. As the curtains fall back into place, they fall into the shape of a human figure, like someone was standing between the window and curtains. My brother-in-laws nudge each other and ask if they had just seen the figure in the curtains. One of them goes, "I'm about to grab my gun and leave." All of a sudden, my father-in-law, who happens to be a pastor, sits up on the couch, points his finger at the figure and says, "I rebuke you in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. Leave this place now." The curtain drops back to their usual place and the temperature returns to normal. My father-in-law lets out a grunt, lays back down and goes back to sleep. My two brother-in-laws didn't sleep a wink that night. The three never went back to that house again. I can't blame them. I never went back after hearing the story either. Nothing paranormal has ever happened to me. My auntie, who is pregnant, is ill, and she's staying in the hospital. She lives in a converted farmhouse in the countryside, up the road from our small town, so kind of in the middle of nowhere. Her boyfriend has been staying with her for the past 2 nights, as they need someone to mind the house while they're away. My uncle, my sister and me have been staying over to watch the house. Tonight, my uncle is visiting my auntie in hospital, so he left me and my sister home alone to mind the house. I'm 19 and she's 15. I was in the box room where me and my sister had been sleeping. I just finished my college work and was eating a salad when I heard my sister on the landing. I knew she was talking to me because I heard her say my name but couldn't hear exactly what she was saying. I went over to the door and I was about to step out of it when I heard her ask what was taking me so long. Confused, I walked onto the landing and saw that she was standing outside the bathroom, and I could also hear the shower running. I asked her what she was doing, and I saw her jump out of her skin and turn to look at me. She looked really confused and asked what I was doing. I asked her what she was doing outside the bathroom with the shower running, but she looked at me in confusion and said that I turned the shower on. I told her that I'd been in the room for the last 2 hours doing work, and I literally watched her turn white and run up to me. I asked her what was up, and she said that she was downstairs watching telly when she decided to go and have a shower, but she already heard the shower running with the door closed, so assumed that I was in there. She peels through the gap in the door and saw the shadow of me moving around behind the glass of the shower. The glass is tinted, so you can't see any figures of the person. She then started telling me to hurry up, not realizing I wasn't even in there because she knows I take ages in the shower. After she told me this whole story, we both ran downstairs and onto the landing. We just didn't say anything and pointed to the bathroom, and it freaked me out so much that we just ran down the stairs. We haven't gone upstairs since, and are just huddled in the living room with the TV on full blast. What the hell is happening? Years ago, I fell asleep on my mother's living room sofa. She was already in bed, but my brother was out somewhere. Sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke to see someone standing over me and covering me with a blanket. It looked like a man wearing a bandana. I assumed it was my brother, but thought it was strange for him to be wearing that. The next morning I asked him about it, and he said he didn't even come into the living room when he came home, and it wasn't him who covered me. My mother also denied doing it, and no one else was in the house that night. I didn't really find that creepy until a while later, and reported the exact same thing happened to her. Apparently there was a ghost in that house that wanted to make sure people were tucked in when they fell asleep on the sofa. I guess it could be worse. My wife and I used to live in this run-down duplex. Through the front door was the living room connected to the kitchen, with a hallway that went out to the rest of the rooms in the place. One night, I was walking back to our bedroom and looked up to see a man with a faint blue glow wearing one of those old-time railroad outfits. I could see him in my peripheral, but when I went to focus on him, he was gone. Now, this is really unsettling for me, because my grandfather had died not too long prior, and he used to work for Frisco. So I moped back into the living room, thinking that I was just upset with having lost him, and that my imagination was playing tricks on me. Well, in walks my wife from our room down the hallway, and she's a shade paler than usual. I ask her if she's alright, and she just kind of shakes her head. This is gonna sound crazy, but I just saw a guy with glowing blue eyes wearing this weird uniform, kind of like what you see in the movies for guys that used to work on railroads, and my jaw hit the floor. Neither of us were really freaked, even though we were a little startled, but my grandfather passed away before I was with my wife, and I never told her what he did for a living. A few days prior, my wife had drawn a salt line at the front door to keep slugs from coming into the house. There's a bonus creepy factor. When I was 3 years old, my mother, father, 2 older brothers and myself moved into a 2-story house in Washington State. I remember the house was renovated and my room was on the 2nd floor, from my parents' room. When I was 4, my uncle died from liver failure in my bedroom during the night, and the next morning I woke up early to crying. I come to find out it was my grandmother crying later, but at the time I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know until I tried to go upstairs from where I had been sleeping on a guest bed during the night before. Once I walked to the 3rd step, I saw my father carrying the lifeless body of my uncle over his shoulder out the front door. I ran back to the spare bed and held my head in my hands, shocked and realizing he was gone. My mother came down after a while to try and break the news to me, and before she said a word I said, "I know, Mummy," and then we both cried. Not long after this, and until we moved out of the house when I was 17, footsteps walking down the hall could be heard coming and going to my room. So loud. My father thought it was an intruder, but when he looked, no one was there. I remember one night when I was about 10 years old. I remember seeing the outline of a man running towards me down the hall as I stood in the dining room. The outline flashed like a turn signal on a car as it got closer. The outline was a dark pink, almost like a light maroon color, and it disappeared entirely halfway down the hall, but I felt it move through me. I was so scared I froze, then sat down on a couch nearby and processed what I saw. I don't remember that night much, but I know the hallway still scared me, and I felt like I was being watched intently by something, and the feeling would go away once I crossed the threshold of my bedroom and closed the door. Over the next several years, everything slowly changed for the worse. After my uncle died, we inherited a few things from him. One of them was a flexible blanket-type game board, with one side being a backgammon board and the other being a Ouija board. The planchette came with it, and as far as I knew, no one ever used it. It took many years before my father found it, and being a Jehovah's Witness and having something like this considered devilish, he burnt it. I remember the black smoke emanating from it. It was thick, and the flames, what little they were purple, or at least I thought they were. I was 8 or 9 when this happened, and even though we had our problems as a family, after that board was burnt, everything began getting worse. My father was never fully the same in the house. He was abusive and would nearly black out in rage when he and my brother would fight. I remember instinctively trying to pull my father off my brother after he knocked him on his back while in a chair during an argument. I never knew what to make of this, but when he knocked me back and he was about to hit me with a closed fist, I remember his eyes being a dark red. He stopped, his expression changed, and he stormed off into his room from that point on. and he never got that angry with my brother again, at least not as far as I know. I know it was something possessing him, tormenting our family, as I had seen and felt something dark in that house. I never liked walking around that house, and the only place I felt the safest was my bedroom. My bed was my sanctuary from a lot of things. Not all the abuse, but some things that could hurt me, as my uncle haunted that room for years. I knew it was him, as his energy was always soothing to me. I remember a few times I would be too scared to sleep, or couldn't due to insomnia, and when I wasn't sleeping with my stuffed white rabbit, its arms would move in the dark, as if he was making it dance to calm me down so that I could sleep. All the abuse I endured in the house finally stopped when my parents divorced, and we went our separate ways and sold the house. I am now 30 years old, happily married and living in another state, and I still occasionally dream about that house. Mostly nightmares. I now know the house is haunted, but not by my uncle, because I crossed him over when I was in my 20s and could defend myself from the supernatural. No, what's there now is dark, and I know a portal is still open there. I just hope that someone notices it and knows how to close it properly. This was late November of 2012, and I was doing an install in a winery in Northern California. It was a long day because we were working out of town, so we worked late to get it finished in one day. I started driving home around midnight and had about a 3-hour drive back home to Oakland. It's about 1:30 a.m. and I'm outside of Stockton, and I see this girl standing on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. She's wearing a white dress that ends at about 3 inches above her knees, and she's barefoot, with long black hair flowing down her shoulders, and is standing statuesquely. I look at her as I drove by, but she didn't move, didn't acknowledge my loud truck as it passed or anything. I was pretty freaked out, because you always hear stories like this, and then she appears in your vehicle, but that wasn't the case. She just stood there in the night. The thing that was most weird to me was that it was a cold night, about low 40s, and was drizzling a bit, and she was wearing a short dress with no shoes standing on the asphalt. If this is just some girl who does this for fun to freak people out, I feel like she would have been extremely cold and shivering. But this girl didn't move. After I got home, I was still thinking about it and searched Ghost Girl outside of Stockton, CA, and found a bunch of articles and stories about the East 8 Mile Road Ghost Girl, and most of the descriptions fit what I saw to a T. I never went back to the area because I moved to another state shortly after, but I want to travel back there to see if I can find her again one day. My dad used to work with someone who sent these pictures to him. He says that the guy was a hunter who was using cameras to see wildlife in the area, and was so freaked out by these pictures and other strange occurrences in his house that he wanted to sell his property. It was very strange. Something interesting about these pictures is that apparently there was an ATV accident in these woods and a young woman was killed. The guy living on the property who captured these pictures showed them to a friend who was one of the EMTs at the scene of the accident, and he thought the girl in the picture was dressed similarly to the one who passed away. I have absolutely no idea when this accident occurred or the specifics of the location, so again I can't be sure if this is credible information. I've tried searching for it, but it is all a mystery. This happened in the early hours of a fall morning. My boyfriend and I had to sleep in separate bedrooms, as the mattress in the room we were using previously was hurting his back. It's important to note that in these rooms, they are next to the porch, so someone could knock on our window, for example, which is exactly what happened. My dad startled me when he came up to the window. He was trying to scare me, obviously, and he said, "What are you doing?" So my dad succeeded in scaring me. I know he's obviously come to pay a visit, so my boyfriend, who heard him as well, and myself, walk the small distance in order to get to the front door. We open it together and are greeted by no one. We look around and call for him, but he doesn't reply. So that's when we start getting weirded out. We assume he must have parked towards the back. So we walk off the porch, down the sidewalk, through the gate, down the side of the house to the garage, which is located in the back of the house a little ways away, but is closer, so we would have been able to run to the garage within the amount of time it took for us to open the door. There's no dad and no truck. We think that maybe he's hiding on the other side of the house or parked outside the gate, but that's very unlikely, as we would have heard him. So we resort to calling him. "Hey, where'd you go?" I say. He replies, "What do you mean? I'm at home. Linda took my truck to work." Linda works a few hours every morning, and that was indeed the case. She was out. After a little bit of arguing, I tell him that I just heard him outside my window and to stop messing with me. But during our conversation, Linda pulls up to the house and he gets her on the phone, and she confirms that she was out with his truck. He tries convincing me that it was other people, but I'm telling him I know what he sounds like and looks like. The weirdest thing is, my boyfriend heard it, and I saw and heard him. I have no idea how to explain this. How to explain that I saw his doppelganger. Has this ever happened to anyone? Or does anyone have any ideas on what it could have been? I'd love to hear your thoughts. This happened when I was in Cub Scouts. We were on an overnight trip to an old naval destroyer and submarine. But we were sleeping, and of course I had to wake up. I thought I heard something like one of the doors opening, but it could have been just my imagination. But after, I looked to my mother to see if she was okay, because I was scared, and then I swear I saw an orb float in front of her. I then freaked out and covered my head with my sleeping bag and passed out. On a later trip, it's said that the place had been found to be haunted and investigated by ghost hunters, so maybe I did see something. On another occasion, I was going to my aunt's house, which is somewhere I loved going to, but the basement always gave me really bad vibes. I was the one who had to sleep on the couch. I slept fairly well, but then of course I had to wake up again. Out of the large window in front of me, I swear on my life that I saw a line of apparitions coming out of the woods behind the house, and I told everyone about my experience that morning. My aunt then told me that she came back home with my cousin and ended up falling asleep on that same couch with him on a crib next to her. She woke up to an apparition of an older lady leaning over his crib. Maybe it was just a dream, but they think it actually happened. Oh yeah, and for added creepiness, there's a pet cemetery next to the house. This last incident is a little shorter. I had just finished taking a shower and was walking towards my room to get dressed. My room is at the end of a dark hallway, but when I looked at my door, I saw an apparition of a younger lady. She was looking at my door. I got scared and ran downstairs, and when I finally got the courage to go back upstairs, of course the apparition was gone. My parents built their house several years before I was born, and the lot they chose to use had a house that had long since fallen down on it. When building, they had to fill in the old well, and while digging the foundation, they found old plates, cups and bottles, some of which they've actually kept in their china cabinet. In the 20 years that I lived there, strange things would happen around the house. Household items would go missing, later to be found elsewhere. My father told us that he heard someone talking upstairs one night when he was there alone. Lots of odd and weird things. I became very familiar with the creaks of doors, stairs, and floors in the house. The strangest thing that happened to me was one day when I was there alone. I heard someone walking across the floor upstairs. I was so familiar and in tune with the sounds of the house that I could actually pinpoint where the steps were coming from, and I could tell that the steps were getting closer and closer to the stairs. Then I heard the top stair squeak, and then the fourth step down make a noise. It had a very familiar thunk. Then the sixth, then the eighth. Whomever or whatever was upstairs was now coming down. I knew for a fact that I was there alone, and the hairs on my arms stood straight up, as they are this very moment just remembering it. I was really close to getting up and running out, but I wanted to see who or what it was. When the footsteps finally hit the bottom, I was completely still, staring into the hallway where the footsteps led to nothing. But you know that feeling when you're being watched? That's what it felt like as I stared down the hall. It felt like someone was staring back at me. But there was no one there. My mum would joke about a poltergeist in the house, maybe a child who used to live in that old house that once stood on their land. And after that moment it wasn't a joke that I found very amusing anymore. My parents' vacation house was haunted by my grandfather, who died 2 weeks before I was born. Until I was 12, we made a shrine for him. But that's a long story, and the shrine did the trick. Anyway, my latest and really most compelling events have been in my own house, though nothing has happened lately. A few years ago, I was home alone, sitting at the dinner table having lunch, when all of a sudden a painting flew off the wall. It was above our keyboard and landed a good 4 feet from the wall. Nothing else in the house moved, and we lived in Nevada, where earthquakes are rare. I'm from the SF Bay area and lived in Humboldt, Colorado for 8 years. I know earthquakes. I've never seen my dog bolt up the stairs so fast. Then a month later or so, I was getting ready for bed. My significant other was asleep, and I hear a bang from the bathroom. We have glass doors on the shower, and he keeps his toothbrush in there, so I figured the cat had knocked it over. Well, because it's a cat. I look down, and the cat is standing by the bedroom door. Somehow the toothbrush flew across the shower hard enough to make a very loud noise, and we found it in the tub after. Weird. It was a brand new house. My parents filed to have it built how they wanted it, and finished it in 2001. We got all moved in, and of course everything fit perfectly. After the first month is when things started happening. I was only 7 at the time. My first experience was my mum's, where she would walk out of the room and the TV would turn off, and she would come back in and it would turn on again. But with our old TV, you could hear the piercing buzzing sound shortly after it turned off. Later that week, she heard the volume turn up with one particular song. One of them was her favorite song, and that's how she picked up on it. The first sign she thought there was a ghost is when she set my 1-year-old sister on the bed while she was crying so that she could change. As she turned around, she heard a very clear female voice consoling her, claiming she specifically said, "It's okay, honey, it's all right," in a very motherly way. She passed it off as thinking what she would be saying to her if she weren't having to change. But my sister had calmed down. Then one day while in the kitchen, the TV was turning off and on again, and she got irritated and said out loud, "Okay, if there's someone in here, give me a sign." And not a second later, The cap of the milk jug screwed itself off and fell from the opposite corner to in between her feet. She freaked out and called my dad. My dad's only experience with her is when he saw some wispy shadow thing he described and said it was a girl. She would stand by him either at the foot of her bed or by his side and watch him. One day he woke up to her and finally said, "I can see you," and immediately disappeared. He also said sometimes he saw her walking around and would say the same thing happened when he told her that he could see her. My experience is when I pulled out the drawers to an old dresser. I couldn't put them back in, so I left them out and came back to the clothes scattered all over the room. I tell my mum, she goes into my room and says out loud, "You can look, but at least put them back." Left the room, came back in later, and the clothes were put away neatly. My older sister's experience is the most interesting. She was cleaning my room because I was too young to do it properly, and I had one of those big brat doll things that could blink and shake her head and had huge feet with a yes and no on them and can talk and was my favorite toy. My sister watched it as it picked up, flew across the corner of the room and landed at a 45-degree angle on its head. Obviously at the time she explained it like this, and she ran screaming, and my mum comes inside and the volume of the radio turns up when she saw she was screaming. We've done research on the piece of land we own, and no one in the neighborhood has had experiences in their house. Turns out the whole place was a Civil War plantation, and our house was in the epicenter. When I was in high school, my parents bought a good-sized house for what they paid. They were aware the house had a history, but none of us were superstitious. The history of the house was that a man had ended his life there. The people who lived in there in the early 80s had rented the basement of the house to their friend. His wife left him, and I guess the divorce was messy. He didn't die in the house, but in the driveway. He ran a hose from his exhaust into the window of his car. My parents lived in there for over 10 years. We always joked about the place being haunted. The basement in particular had a creepy feel to it. I never got the whole "feels like you're being watched" feeling before then, and haven't since, but you just got that feeling. There was always small things going on, creaky floors, breezes and stuff like that. Most were dismissible, but here's some things that stand out. My mother was reading a book in the living room late at night. Sometimes she had trouble sleeping and was going to read until she got tired. This night she was sitting there and heard a metal noise like a ting, then the clack 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 of something hitting the floor. She turned around to see the final skid of a fork as it came to a stop beside her. 3 forks were sitting on the table across the room. She said it sounded like someone had hit the tongs and sent it flying across the room. Everyone was asleep at the time. Well, after my sister and I had moved out, my sister had a child. My parents brought an automated swing for the baby for when they visited. The swing would randomly swing on its own. It would be turned off, and it would be like someone had lightly pushed it. It happened enough that my parents would just kind of mention it lightly when it happened. They'd say, "Oh look, it's moving again," and go about their day. One night I was staying over at my parents' watching TV. It was 2 a.m. and I heard a tap tap tap. It was coming from the fireplace. The swing was about 7 feet from there for reference, and the tap was deliberate sounding, like a person or animal had done it. I shrugged it off and kept watching TV. 5 minutes later, tap tap tap. I'm intrigued now. I go to the fireplace expecting a trapped bird, but there's nothing. No taps, so I sit down and once I pass the swing, it happens again. I have a better hearing vantage now, and it sounds like someone tapping on the mantel. I walked up to it, and when I get to it, it taps louder. Nothing was there that could have caused it, and the hair on my arm is standing on edge. I'm kind of spooked, turn around and go outside for a smoke, and the tap happens again. Instead of a third tap though, like in the other occasions, the swing swung forward like someone had pushed it with force. I have a couple of cigarettes instead of one. Finally, back when I was just out from school, before moving out, I was up late. I was in the hall when I hear my father yell, "What the hell?" I ask through the door if everything's okay. He exits the room and is white as a sheet. He said he woke up and saw two old ladies standing at the foot of the bed. They were just staring at him and mouthing something like talking to him. He said there was no expression on their faces and no sounds. When he yelled, they just disappeared. I was in a major car accident over a decade ago. My car was hit by another car in such a way where I lost control of the car. The car somehow went on a full circle on the highway. I T-boned a Jersey wall, completely destroying it and cracking the next two in line. And I bounced off that onto an off-ramp with my side of the car facing traffic. I'm about to exhale when I hear, "Hey kid, when I start counting you have 8 seconds to move your car or you're going to be hit by an 18-wheeler. Do you understand?" 8, 7, 6. Voice didn't have to tell me twice. I threw my car into drive and got on the shoulder. At 1, an 18-wheeler drove by the spot my car was parked on. I should have died, according to the cops surveying the crash site. But I walked away with a few bruises and needed a root canal a few days later. I probably imagined the voice, but damn, I'm believing it was something otherworldly. I grew up in a house that was creepy as hell. Everyone saw shadows move, everyone lost things, and everyone heard voices in that house. People who had never heard the stories about it would come into the house for the first time and comment on strange things. One night during the summer, I'm laying awake on my bed trying to fall asleep, but I can't. It's too hot, and it feels weird in the room. I'm on my right side, then my left, then back again. This whole time, my brother is singing and tapping in the bunk above me. Finally, pissed, I reach up to push up on his bed. I could do this in retaliation when he was loud. As I roll onto my back, I feel a hand through my mattress. It started at my neck and swept down my back, pushing the mattress as I went. It scared the ever-living crap out of me right there and then, and I never did figure out what that was. My ex worked in a kitchen in one of the oldest universities in the UK, Oxford. Being a little bummed that he had to work a few days while I was visiting, I cruised around town solo, and would then come to meet up with him at work when his shift would be ending. And one day, I showed up a little earlier because I had to pee like crazy, and though I could just use their bathroom, he let me in, showed me a little twisty staircase, and said that the ladies is down there, and rushed back to work. Being more than a little stoked to being able to explore the downstairs of an ancient building, I was like, cool, and headed down. I located the ladies' room and then proceeded to do the quickest pee of my life. It was totally inexplicable. The feeling in this beautiful little Victorian bathroom was horrific, really oppressive, like it wanted me to get the hell out of there. It was also freezing, but I just didn't know that it was English architecture. Anyway, I just noped right out of those stairs and hung around the back, waiting for him to sign off. Later that evening, I casually asked how it was working in such an old building, like if he had ever found it spooky in the evenings, and he said, "No, not really." He was looking at me though, kind of like he knew, and asked why I was asking. And I said, "Oh, the bathroom was just really creepy." And he said, "Yeah, my mate went down there for a leak once and saw a lady with her back turned to him in the bathroom. He was like, 'Oh crap,' and backed out, apologizing profusely, thinking he went into the ladies by accident. But once the door closed, he confirmed he was in the right one." It struck him that the woman he saw was wearing really old clothes, like at least a few 100 years back kind of outfit. Kind of freaked out, he opened the door again to tell the woman it was actually the wrong toilet, but she was gone. My house has always freaked me out at night. I'd always hear my computer chair creaking when no one was in it. Sometimes cabinets would be open. Whenever I would sit at my computer, my back would be facing a window, and I always got the creeping sensation someone was watching me. When I got that room remodeled and added a door to my backyard in that room, it only got creepier. Late at night, I'd hear small taps at the door. Of course, I looked, and nothing would be out there, so I started ignoring it. But one night over the summer, while it was storming, there was a tremendous thump against the door. I ran to check it out, but wasn't able to see anything in the rain. The next day, the grass outside my door had been ground up as if someone were jumping up and down in it. In my bedroom, sometimes a quick flash of light would come through my blinds. I started folding them up, and it stopped though. I sometimes just feel unsafe when I'm alone now. I've always felt like I was being watched in my room, and if I had the door open to the hallway, I'd swear I'd always see someone walk by the corner of my eye. We had 2 cats, and sometimes they'd be in my room sleeping. They would sit bolt up, stare at the door, and nothing I did could move them for a long time. This happened often. One day in my bathroom, the shelf that had my sister's beauty stuff randomly lost hold of all of the items. The thing was, the shelf wasn't loose or hanging, and all the stuff had to bounce out of our 2-inch high lip into the sink. One time, in the middle of the night, my sister's 100-year-old dresser she got as a gift from our grandma just fell over. This thing weighed a ton and was built like a tank. My sister said she heard the sound of someone pushing it. My mum and sister used to yell at me for sneaking around the house, only I wasn't, or I wasn't home. They said they saw a man in the shadows and thought it was me because it was about my height. One day we also ran into the old owner, and my mum casually asked the lady if she had ever experienced anything in the house. The lady started crying and said no one believed her, but yes, she experienced a lot there too. I moved out of there and don't miss the place. My mother moved into a rental home recently. I always thought something was off with the person that we were renting from, because they were very quiet and always eyeballing the rooms of the house. After living there with my mother for a few months, here are my paranormal experiences. My parents are divorced, so when I stay at my dad's for 2 weeks, my mother goes to her 40-acre property with my stepdad. Occasionally I will stop by at the rental house to grab stuff or play computer games. We started noticing lights turning on and off and doors opening and closing. It doesn't happen often when we are in there for a while, but when we come back after 2 weeks of being gone, that's when the activity picks up. A few things happened a few times while I was staying there, and things like my bed sheets being yanked off me while I'm chilling in bed, and my wireless headphones cracking and making weird glitchy sounds that never occur at my dad's house. The sound could be most compared to a modem startup or an old-timey dial-up that sounds a bit distorted. My mother keeps having her blinds tampered when she comes back, and she finds her blind clips on her bed every once in a while, even though she doesn't move them. Her toilet seat occasionally is left upwards randomly, and it's neither me or my brother or stepdad, as none of us are around or even use her bathroom. Occasionally, we will hear commotion in the living room, but when we look in there, nothing is going on and the sound stops. One night, while I was writing my paper for one of my college classes and working on my computer afterwards, a hammer and screwdriver were thrown into the garage floor while I was upgrading my PC components. Shortly after, I heard rustling in the direction of our bedrooms and found mine and my mother's bed sheets rustled up. When I was maybe 9 or 10, my mum worked at the hospital for the graveyard shift. Me and my sister would usually sleep when she left. My sister was 5 at the time, and we were playing in the living room. We had a huge TV in there and 2 remotes for our TV because we had the same type of TV in my older sister's room. The remote for the TV in the living room was on the couch, but the remotes could be used for either room. So we were playing and suddenly the TV switches on. It made some weird noises, and then the 10 o'clock news started playing as normal. Me and my sister were scared out of our minds because neither of us had touched the remotes. Our cats were in the other room, and we both slept in my older sister's room because this was a 2-bedroom, and we ran into her room and saw that she was asleep too, and the remote was on the dresser across the room from the bed. I woke her up, and she comforted us. It isn't that scary in retrospect, but I was a little kid, and it took me forever to fall asleep that night. I've had a few paranormal experiences all within the house I lived in as a child. The first time I ever truly remembered one was when I was in high school. It was late, and I had just said goodnight to my family. I went into my room, closed the door, and got ready for bed. As I was laying down in bed, no more than 5 to 10 minutes after resting, I felt what seemed to be a handprint pressing against the edge of my bed near my feet. I bolted up, expecting to see my younger brother. However, upon inspection, no one was there. In fact, I could hear my little brother joking with my mum in the kitchen, which wasn't too far from my room. But there was no way he could have snuck out without me noticing, since there was a large space between the foot of my bed and the door. Freaked out, I bolted from my room, panicked, and tried to put as much distance between my bed and I. I saw my brother and mum staring at me in bewilderment as I ran into the kitchen, in hysterics, as I attempted to explain to them, but was told it was all in my head and go back to bed. I was ashamed and embarrassed since I had no proof to what I experienced, but I knew it wasn't in my head. And I had enough people later who experienced things in that house to prove me right. I can still remember this quite vividly. A little background first. At the time I lived in this creepy older house, a dual-unit Victorian, and sometimes me and my older sister would notice an unexplainable shadow from the corner of our eye, even at the same time. We never let it seriously bother us, and anyway, there was always an adult round within earshot. My mum just picked me up from school, and right when we arrive at home, she mentions that she forgot to buy an ingredient for dinner, and says that we need to go to the market. I politely refuse, since I really wanted to watch the Transformers, as it was one of the 5-day special linked series. I think it was The Return of Optimus Prime, which was about to start. And hell, I'm a big kid now, a 6th grader. I'll be fine. She asks again to make sure, and I assure her again that we both know that the neighbors, who are actually our relatives, are home, and I can go there if anything comes up. Before my mum leaves, she talks to the neighbors to mention that I'm home. Rejoice, free at last. I'm the man of the house. Immediately I turn on the kitchen TV and break out my Lego to play on the kitchen table. So I'm watching Transformers while playing with my Lego, and I fumble with a piece which lands past the doorway into the adjoining hallway. I ignore it since I didn't want to miss a moment of Transformers. After 10 minutes later, I notice the shadow in the corner of my eye, right where the Lego lies on the floor. I'm freaked out a bit, to the point that the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. But hell, Transformers is on, and I'm a big kid, and decide to turn the volume up on the TV. Minutes pass. I've forgotten all about the Lego, and I'm fully engrossed watching Optimus Prime do his thing. Then suddenly, something hits me on the side of the head, and I distinctly hear a click-click sound as the Lego lands on Lego. My internal alarm goes off, and I slowly turn my head towards the Lego piece in the hallway. It's not there. Screw this, I'm out, and a moment later, I'm at my neighbor's banging on the door. When I was around 12 to 14, I lived in my own house where some unexplainable things happened, like cupcakes falling over and chairs moving. But there's one memory that sticks with me and gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. I share a bedroom with my twin, and we had bunk beds. I was the top bunk. One night I woke up at around 3:30 a.m. and was trying to go back to sleep when suddenly, out of complete silence, I hear a creak from the bottom of the stairs. It was an old house, and I'd been living in it since I was born, so I figured it was just it being old. The sound slowly made its way up the stairs, and I was facing the door, which was slightly open to where I could see into the hallway, but not the stairs, so I just froze in fear. Once it reached the top, it stopped, and I pretended to be asleep but had my eyes slightly open to see if I could see whatever it was. The noise was so chilling. It finally stopped after 5 minutes but felt like forever. I then had the balls to turn over and stuff my face into my pillow to try and fall asleep. The next morning I walked downstairs and found all the chairs huddled up in the middle of the kitchen. I ended up moving out of that house and haven't experienced anything like that again. Shortly after we moved into our new house, my brother found a couple of used bullets and shells under the basement stairs. The bullets were pretty destroyed, so he threw them away but kept the shells. They looked like handgun bullets, maybe 9mm or something. We didn't think much of it, but within a year, we started noticing weird things. One day we heard scratching at our door. All 3 dogs were inside, and when we opened it up, there was nothing in the yard. Even creepier was the fact that sometimes in the snow we would find a dog track far too large to be our own dogs in the yard. We thought it might just be our imagination, but one day we saw a huge black figure go flying by in the window and look outside, once again to see nothing. We were both pretty spooked. Then a few years later, we were in the basement, and when we looked away, the head of a doll moved slightly to the left. It was slow and progressively creepier because eventually it was facing my brother and I. We were both across the room, so this was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. We even recorded it, but the camera was pretty garbage and the battery died before it had fully swapped over to us. We both went into the other half of our basement, and when we went back, the doll was in its original position. We were both pretty traumatized, and that wasn't the last of it. The last major thing I remember was when we were in the living room together playing games. It was getting darker, but you could still see shadows from outside every once in a while. The bathroom door was wide open, and my brother and I saw the same thing. At first, we thought it was a shadow, but it wasn't transparent. Basically, there was a black figure in the bathroom, and when my brother walked over it, it darted away. Even though now I don't believe in paranormal stuff, I often question these events and wonder if maybe I should. I've always known my house was haunted. I remember as a kid, I had this weird thing I always did before walking out of my room. I poke my head out and check both ends of the hall, like you would check if a car is coming across an alley. I did that, looked into the void of the darkness that was my dining room. Nothing. But when I turned to the kitchen, I swear I saw a red-tinted figure just standing there doing nothing. The bathroom was across the hall, and I really needed to go, but I remember starting to cry in fear before turning back into my room, flipping the light on, and hiding under the cover. I never saw that red figure again, so I just like to pretend it was a figure of my imagination. But any time I think of it, I'm still worried if it's real or if I'm just crazy. After my grandparents died, me and my girlfriend, now wife, moved into their house. We were doing the house up to sell, and multiple things happened to us over the 2 years we lived there. It started with the TV. It used to switch itself on nearly every night around 2 a.m. and would just be static, but very loud. We used to go downstairs and switch it off, and still have the same TV. It's never done it since we left that house, and that was 5 years ago. One time my girlfriend was sat on the couch and could feel someone stroking her back. On another occasion, my girlfriend was hoovering at the top of the stairs and someone pushed her, but she grabbed the handrail and stopped herself from falling down the stairs. We also used to hear footsteps all the time coming up and down those stairs. There was another occasion where I was cooking and the oven was by the window of the conservatory, so I could see inside. The door to the conservatory was on the right-hand side of the cooker with frosted windows. My girlfriend is chatting to me, and as I'm cooking, she freaks out and says, "Someone just walked past the door." I see through the window and just laugh at her, but she was adamant someone walked past, so I open the door and switch the light on and there's nothing there. Later that night, I'm locking up to go to bed in the conservatory. The cat follows. I check the back door and it's locked. I go to switch off the light, and I stop before I do. The cat's freaking out, hissing, and she runs out of the conservatory freaked out. The light blows, shatters everywhere, and it's dark. Then something barges me in the shoulder, and I get knocked back and hit my back hard into the wall. Then I'm at the door of the living room. I don't know how I got there. My girlfriend is sitting down looking at me. "Are you okay? You've gone white." Apparently I'd ran into the living room and stopped at the door, but I've no recollection of this. I told her what happened and she said, "I told you I saw something." I went into the conservatory, cleaned up, and nothing has happened since. My shoulder and back were hurting for a good week though. I told my mum what happened, as she grew up in that house, and told me multiple stories of things that she used to see, hear, and feel in that house. Yet no one else did in the family of 7 that lived there. Just my mum, me, and my girlfriend. Then my mum told me what used to happen when I was 2 or 3 in the first house I lived in. It was worse than this, yet I have no memory of it. I live with my husband in a large house in the country. We live right next to a large field, and past that is a wheat field. We love to take our pit bulls out for runs out there. There is a street running horizontally from the field, as we do live in a very tiny subdivision out in the middle of nowhere. This happened in June or July of 2014. I was sitting on the bed talking to my mum on the phone at around 11 p.m. at night. My husband was in the study down the hall. The 2 windows in our master bedroom face outside into the backyard. Everything was normal until I heard what sounded like a plane landing in our backyard. Only it didn't sound like a plane engine in the slightest. It was so close to the windows and the ground that the house shook. It was so loud that I couldn't hear my mum clearly anymore. Well, this noise freaked my cat out, so she bolted to hide under my dresser. I told my mum to hold on as I rushed to the back door to see what in the world was making such a loud, explosive engine noise. And that's when I heard the explosion. Great. Now whatever is in the backyard exploded. I threw the door open and see nothing. Not a darn thing. And it's silent. Not a car, not a person, not a plane, nothing. I assumed that an 18-wheeler must have crashed outside. Perhaps they needed help. So I ran around into the front yard and looked up and down the horizontal road by the field looking for a crash. Nothing. All noise was gone. I looked up the street next to us as well. No one heard it. I was the lone dingbat outside at 11 p.m. I went back inside and told my mum I'd call her back, because now I'm freaked out, and I just heard World War III happen and there's no explanation from where it came from. I then asked my husband if he heard anything, and he told me he felt the house shake a bit, but he was gaming with his headphones on so didn't hear a thing. Apparently, Castile, our pit bull, didn't hear anything either. She didn't bark or stir. I hope I explained this well enough, because I'd really like to know what I heard. The noises had to have come from somewhere, right? I don't understand how our neighbors behind us didn't come barreling out of their house looking around for the noises like I did. Any insight would be appreciated. 2 years ago, my family moved into a very nice apartment complex in the Houston, Texas area. We were looking for a nice complex and went in and was told by the assistant manager they had a model apartment that was used for viewings up the grabs. She mentioned that it had not been occupied for a long time, but she was willing to give it to us. We moved in a month later without giving it much thought. The apartment had a studio/attic that was connected to the stairway. The attic/studio was open, and from the attic you could see the living room looking down. Every time the maintenance people had to do something, they were very quick to leave and not mingle around too much in the apartment. The maintenance manager once made a remark and said, "I never thought they were going to lease this apartment again." When asked why, he was very quick to change the subject to avoid answering our question. I'm a graveyard shift nurse, and my wife and kids stay at home alone 4 times out of the week. During my days off, I stay up at night watching TV. I noticed in the living room, close to the stairs, a heavy cold presence, as if someone was looking at the between hours of 1 to 4 a.m. every time. I felt a presence watching me at these times, to the point where I would oftentimes leave the living room. I felt somebody was at the stairwell looking down on me. Fast forward a year, and we had moved out, and me and my family moved into our first new home. I told my wife randomly that I felt comfortable in this new home and didn't feel a bad energy watching me. My wife turned pale as snow and asked, "You felt the same energy too watching you from the stairway at early morning hours too?" We both turned pale, as we both realized at that moment we had lived in an apartment that housed a spirit. To this day, we don't know exactly what happened. Our assumption is that someone ended their own life by jumping from the studio attic into the living room. The management locked the unit for a long time and then decided to lease it again. To this day, no one in the complex will open up and talk about what happened in apartment 2811. I've had several strange experiences happen at my dad's house. There was a hand mark on the wall in my dad's house, like a print from someone with dirty hands. A really big hand. Nothing extreme, just big. And every time we would wipe it off, it would come back the next day. Whatever was in my dad's house seemingly also targeted his girlfriend. Almost every time she was alone in the house, she would hear noises of doors opening or faint whispering in other rooms. I heard the whispering too, loud enough to hear it, but not loud enough to actually understand what they were saying. There was this one time my dad's girlfriend was showering and felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned around and there was nothing, and then remembered she was home alone. One other time when she was cooking, a can of beans was thrown out of the cabinet to her head. My dad also reported seeing people around his bed at night. I've seen a little girl in old clothes from the corner of my eye several times from when I was there. They now try to control it by burning incense and sage, something prescribed in specialized rituals. It became something quite normal to me generally. I've experienced way more stuff though, much to my dismay. This story is from my parents, who bought a house and were fixing it up. Apparently the family before them were an elderly couple who had a grandson living with them, and one day the grandson died by getting hit by a car right outside, or from the flu. I can't remember which one exactly. My mum was there painting and left the brush in a certain spot, came back later and found it elsewhere. My aunt and uncle would help out some days, and one day my aunt was there by herself and was about to leave, and the water upstairs turned on by itself. So she went to turn it off and went back downstairs only for it to turn on again. She freaked out and left. Finally, there was the time my uncle was there. He was preparing to leave, and the light switch on a chain at the top of the stairs began dangling. He left pretty quickly after that. My grandmother is almost 60, and I'm in really bad shape. My aunt just left her to go to college, so my family decided to move her in with us. My mother and I were almost done pulling all of my grandma's stuff in storage. It was pretty late, about 2 a.m, and the house's power goes out, and we're on our way back to the house getting the very last of the stuff, and I looked at my mum and said, "Hey Mum, I know this sounds weird, but I wish I had more paranormal experiences in my life." She laughed and said something not important. We finally made it back to the house, and I realized my grandma's cat was in one of the rooms in a pet carrier, so I knocked on the door and said the cat's name. I walked away, and all I heard from that room was the cat hiss, and then knock, knock, knock. I'm only 15 and don't normally curse in front of my mother, but I ran out of the house screaming holy shit. She asked what's wrong, and I said that I knocked on the room with the cat and it knocked back. And then she told me, "That was knocking? I thought you dropped something." She heard the knocking and she wasn't even inside the house. Sadly, I had to go back in and get the cat, and on my way off the front porch, me and my mum both heard something, and the best way to explain it was when you wake up from a very deep sleep, and all they do is make a groaning sound. That kind of sound. We got into the car as fast as we could and drove away. We told my grandmother about what happened, and she told us that she heard the knocking coming from that door every night. It would wake her up and make her think someone was breaking in. And I even remember her telling us about it a few weeks ago. I haven't been back to the house since. I've always had some kind of affinity with the paranormal. When I was a teenager, I wouldn't stop writing extremely dark, creepy poetry. I have always been a loner. One best friend kind of people, if none. Anyway, on to the story. My parents divorced when I was young, so I became depressed and spent a lot of time alone. We moved in with my grandpa and grandma, and they gave us a little house near them. It was so close that we didn't have to walk 5 meters to reach the other door. My mum always spent time there with them, when I preferred to be alone in our new little house. One time, I was sleeping in the dark there. I dreamed that there was a guy with a black face sitting at the edge of my bed staring at me. I awoke terrified, with that dreadful feeling that there was someone there with me. I snapped out of my place, turned on the lights, and ran to my grandpa's house, and sat beside my grandma and said, "That house can be so creepy." She said, "Of course, 2 guys died there from gas while they were renting the place. We found them a week later." She said it like it was a casual thing to tell, and it was also a slap on the face. That was only a warm-up though. As I got older, my mum remarried, and my grandpa moved to another house of his 150 meters from the previous one. I was left to rot in the old one, living alone for an entire year and a half in my grandpa's old house, which was big, old and creepy, even though their new house wasn't too far from me. But still, I saw stuff there. Shadow people. I remember avoiding most areas in the house. My living consisted in staying in the living room, kitchen and bathroom. The reason was, I always got that eerie feeling of being watched all the time. I was a student finishing my graduation project, so I didn't leave the house that much, except for buying my groceries. There were 2 long hallways in my house. The first led to the bathroom, and the second left to my previous grandparents' room. It was a big room, and it was always locked as they kept their stuff in there. So when you stood in the hallway, you couldn't see the door at the end of it. It was so dark, like an endless hallway of darkness. I always avoided that area. You'd somehow start to feel when something is wrong in these situations. I would always hear banging on the door very late at night, at 2 or 3 a.m. I would brush it off and play courageous since I had no choice. I had to stay in that house, or else I had literally nowhere to live. I was always locking the door to the living room, turning the TV on and trying to fall asleep every night. The door didn't lock all that well, and I'd use a chair as an added measure. One night, I wasn't feeling so good, and woke up burning with a fever, almost hallucinating, when I heard the chair move. That's when I saw them. A small, dark, shadowy figure sneaking a peek on me. I couldn't believe my eyes. I got up, switched the light on and looked. The chair moved out of its place to let the door slightly open. I started crying. I called my parents, but none of them answered. To be fair, it was around 3 in the morning. I prayed and tried calming down, convincing myself that I was imagining it. 2 months later, I was watching a video about the jinn on YouTube with loudspeakers. For those of you who don't know, jinn are creatures in the Islamic religion equivalent to demons. The video was called 30 Facts You Didn't Know About Jinns. The last one stated that jinns were living with us, and one of them could probably be watching you right now. I giggled and said, "I'm not scared," but I knew I would regret that later. That same night, I put some Quran readings, since it was supposed to keep the shadow people and jinns away, as per my religion. And I kid you not, at 2 a.m. I woke up to 3 shadow people dancing. One of them was at my feet, another at my head, and the third standing at my face. They were all making a strange noise, almost like static. It was so annoying. I screamed, telling them to leave me alone, and they left, and all was calm. Soon after, I began suffering from insomnia. I couldn't sleep at night anymore. I would spend the night studying, finishing my project, cooking, watching TV, playing video games, and drifting at around 6 a.m. when daylight began peaking. Once, I went to sleep and began dreaming. It was so realistic, it didn't even feel like a dream, and I started hearing some kind of whispers. It's not gentle whispering. It was violent, like a chorus from hell. The closest description would be the soundtrack from Dante's Inferno. Quiet but loud and evil and aggressive. I would hear it in my ears always at the same time, but it was always different. I was still dreaming. I stood up for the source of the sound, and it was at the creepy room at the end of the hallway, which probably became haunted because it wasn't open for too long. I got closer, and there was a man emerging from the darkness. He was bald, short, and had muscular arms. I could even see his veins. He looked right through my soul while he came my way, and I started reciting prayer. At the same time, I heard my cousin screaming at the stairs of the house on my left, telling me to flee. The door was opposite to my left, so I started moving, and it was a struggle, like something was pulling me from the other way. I made it through the open door and got out gasping for air. I thought this thing was chasing me. It's in my house, and I didn't want to go back. That's when I woke up, to the whispering in my ear once more. After a while, my grandparents came to stay for a bit. She would always sleep with the light on at night. I woke up feeling strange, and I kid you not, there was a giant little girl holding something in her left arm. She had the wildest eyes I'd ever seen whilst grinning at me. She was staring right through me and holding a little dwarf kind of guy. He had a tail and greyish skin and was staring at my grandma. I didn't know what to do, so just tried to go back to sleep and ignored them. On another occasion, I was sleeping and actually conversing with someone or something. I thought I was dreaming, but when I opened my eyes, I couldn't see them, but was still arguing with them. "You should let us in. You're done for anyways. Nobody wants you. Your parents left. We're the only ones that will help you now." I was afraid of them. I didn't trust them. What were they saying? They were pressuring me. I was feeling lost, desperate and alone. I opened my eyes and was crying and a mess. One other night, I dreamed that I was in a very big bedroom in a castle, and it was very fancy. The bedroom was very well decorated, and there was an old woman who looked like a cliché witch attending a funeral. She was asking me to let her in. She was very angry, and after a while of making fun of her, she left. And then another one came. This one took her place and was deaf and mute. It was a very strange dream. And after that, my grandma started sleeping in her old bedroom and accused me of running around her bed, throwing stuff at her in the middle of the night, pulling the covers off and the like. I didn't know what she was talking about, but she once woke up screaming, and we found half of her stuff burned beside her candles. No lighters, no fire source, and she left that same night. Fast forward a while. I grew up, graduated, started working and got a job out of the country. I left my current work in the Middle East, and I stay alone in a room in a local housing, and I wake up at 5 a.m. to find white fog in my face. I was covered in it. I stay there for a while, then it turned completely black and vanished. I have no idea what it was. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I must commend you. You have made it to the very end of this video. An absolute triumph. Give yourself a pat on the back. I do hope that you enjoyed these stories, as it was one hell of a time to narrate, in a good way. The total time as of recording this was 4 hours 37, so I'm going to estimate that this video was about an hour, 3 hours and 50 long. So, I'll see at the end if I'm right post-edit. I hope you have all had an amazingly spooky Halloween, and hopefully these stories have contributed somewhat to the spookiness. If you enjoyed this video, which was a Herculean effort on my part, please don't forget to show it some love. Drop a like, leave a comment, and do all the good stuff. If you've listened all the way to the end and aren't subscribed, well, it'd be nice if you did. You can also press the bell icon to be notified every time I post, which is every night. Except maybe tomorrow. Maybe I won't post tomorrow because this has been really challenging and I doubt anyone is going to listen to nearly 4 hours worth of content in a day. So maybe not tomorrow. But other than that, pretty much every night. Thank you to all my amazing and lovely patrons whose names can be seen on screen. If you would like to join Patreon, you can find the link at the top of the description. You get a handful of awesome perks for signing up, and all the information is within the link. It's pretty cool. Stuff like exclusive stories, special requests, the ability to pick any video for the month. Cool stuff. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome. Well done for reaching the end, and I'll see you in the next one.